If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Have you ever had a real-life paranormal or supernatural horror encounter that convinced you to believe? Share the story that still scares you.
When my brother was killed, I went into hiding at my aunt's house. My friends tracked down where I was and would take turns coming to take me out on walks. I always brought my brother's handkerchief with me. My most straight-laced, logical, A-type business friend came to walk with me. I folded up my brother's handkerchief and put it in my pocket before we left. When we returned, I put my hand on the door handle and said to him, "That's so weird. It feels like someone is at home, but my aunt has gone to work." He agreed that he thought someone was home. He isn't the type to follow feelings, but he felt sure someone was home. I unlocked the door and turned the handle, and we both looked in at once. There, between the dining room and the kitchen, stood my brother. He appeared shadowy, yet I could see him clearly. He smiled at me, his neck bent to an unnatural angle, and then suddenly he was gone. I stuttered out to my friend, "Do you see him? Do you see him?" My friend was wide-eyed as duck and replied, "No, but I feel him, and I see that." He pointed to the ground between the dining room and the living room. There, on the ground where I had seen my brother standing, was my brother's handkerchief perfectly unfolded. I reached for my pocket, where I had carefully placed it before we left for our walk. It was not there. My friend had watched me fold it and place it in my pocket before we left. 2 days later, I learned that my brother's neck had been broken. I grew up in an 1800s house in the mountains just outside downtown Asheville. The land surrounding our property, as well as the neighboring properties, consisted of cottages for tuberculosis patients and quarters for doctors. I was terrified in the house from a very young age, before any awareness of the concept of a spirit. I always felt watched, like I was never alone. There are memories burned in my brain of the things I saw, felt, and heard. I remember asking my dad if he was walking back and forth down the hall in the night, to which he said, "No." I had to be around 8 when my stepmom sat me down and told me they'd experienced similar things right after moving in, doorknobs rattling on their own, metal dragging across the floor at night. She said they actually had to talk to whatever was there and ask it to calm down. And I did the same. There was also a woman whose ashes were buried in our yard. They told me she had loved children and that she probably liked me. I found her presence more comforting growing up, though it sounds creepy. My friends were always terrified when they slept over. We would sneak into some of the old buildings that were still scattered around the mountain. Some were apartments, others abandoned. One afternoon I saw a little girl in the yard. She looked to be about my age, but I didn't recognize her, and we were tucked away enough that any visitor would have stood out. This was a classic moment. I looked around, then she was gone. Years later, our neighbors found a framed photograph in their attic of the doctors and patients posing, everyone in their Victorian best. The women were in long white dresses. And there, near the edge of the group, was the little girl. She was the same little girl I'd seen in the yard. I wish I still had it. The property has since been bought and torn down. But I'll never forget her face or the feeling I got seeing that picture. Like she was watching me. When I was maybe 6 or 7, my bedroom had a huge picture window. We lived out in the country, not exactly in deep woodland, but there were some trees along the edge of the property, well away from the house. One night as I was getting settled in bed, something was at my window. The creature, about the size of a child, had glowing eyes and placed a hand on the window. I told myself it must be a raccoon, but the face was humanoid except for the eyes, and it didn't appear to have ears at all. It didn't appear furry, either. I was terrified. I wanted to get under my covers and hide, but also I was afraid to take my eyes off it. After some time, probably no more than a minute, but I had no concept of how long at that age, it just disappeared. It didn't look like it hunched down or walked away or anything. It was just there, then it wasn't. Maybe I blinked or even fell asleep briefly. I still tell myself it was a raccoon since they can stand on 2 legs and have hands, but I honestly don't know. It didn't look like an animal. When I was homeless, I lived in a few different squats over the years. Some of the abandoned houses or businesses I stayed in were quite unsettling. It was a huge, vacant store in the city that had been empty for almost a decade. Well, I used to live in it. It always had a weird vibe, and people would talk about this thing that they called Oogie Boogie. People would run out screaming, everyone had stories. People would go missing from this house, and occasionally you would hear screaming before you went in the door, and then no one was there once you got inside. One night, a group of younger people was inside smoking meth and other substances. I was in my corner, minding my own business and organizing my belongings, when these people began calling on the ghost or spirit. Well, things started going weird straight away. It's super dark in the place, but noises started happening, like things being chucked around and heavy footsteps, etc. As a result, the group panicked and ran out, laughing and screaming, leaving me alone in the squat. I immediately felt some huge presence behind me, like it was looking down at me, asking, "What about you? Why won't you run?" Overwhelmed with emotion, I began to cry and said aloud, "I'm so sorry that I am homeless. I have nowhere else to go. I'm sorry I'm in your space, but I have no one." The next minute, the feeling of presence lightened. I felt it was still there, but it was no longer a scary feeling. It was like it felt sorry for me. There was a huge crash from another room, and I looked around, but nothing. When I looked back down at my bed, there had appeared a little scruffy old kangaroo teddy bear. I felt so safe that I cuddled it and went straight to sleep. From that day on, when people would come in and get tormented by this whatever it was, I would giggle and feel that this thing was doing it almost for my entertainment, because the feeling for me, at least, was now super lighthearted, and it was like I was having a private joke with it. The building ended up getting demolished a few months later, and I got housing, but I will never forget that whatever it was took pity on my situation and that I couldn't run away like everyone else. I will never forget it. Yes. One night, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of soft humming. I live alone. The melody was unfamiliar, but it felt old. I checked every room, nothing. As I returned to bed, my TV flicked on by itself. A paused black and white movie was playing, and the subtitle read, "You're not alone." I don't even own that movie. The humming stopped. I never heard it again, but I still wake up at 3:17 sometimes for no reason at all. When I lived in Payson 20 years ago, there was a story of a headless ghost that lived up Sanakin Canyon. I guess a girl died there a long time ago, and she had a very sad death. Since then people have seen her up there without a head and screaming or walking and making sounds while walking through the brush. There's always been some type of scary story about that canyon. Anyways, me and my friends went out there one night, and we had about 7 people with us. We had a campfire, and we were drinking. I remember I was camping out there in a tent, and one of my other friends was camping out there with 2 people in his tent. I had my girlfriend with me in my tent. All through the night I felt like something was watching me, right outside the line of light from the campfire. We went to sleep, and to my shock, I started hearing things in the middle of the night. I figured it was one of my friends waking up to take a pee. My girlfriend woke up and heard it, so I decided to look outside. When I did this, I noticed that we were the only tent left. I asked her, "Where did James go?" She said he had a tent up before we went to sleep, maybe he packed it up and left, and then she said, "Oh my God, are we the only people left?" After she said that, another sound happened right next to our tent. I looked over with my flashlight, and there was absolutely nothing there. Then I heard feet walking away from the tent. I figured my friends were probably messing with us or something. This time my girlfriend was so scared that she stayed in the tent and had the blanket over her. I decided to scan around the area with my flashlight, and I swear when I did this, I saw something walk behind the tree line. I don't know what it was to this day, but it wasn't an animal. I could have sworn it was human, but it didn't look like a girl that looked like a guy. After that I told my girl to hurry up and get up, "There's somebody out here." We packed up my tent. I had a knife with me, I flicked it out to make sure the blade was out. While we were packing, I never heard anything again there. Hurry up and put our stuff in the car, and drive back to Payson and sleep at my house. It felt so good to sleep in a bed and get away from there. Somebody was out there that night or something. Tower Hill Road. I live in Rhode Island, and for my 16th birthday I took 6 of my friends, including my sister and her friend, to Tower Hill Road for ghost hunting. Our experience there was one that would traumatize us. We came across a driveway on that road that seemed pretty creepy, but that made me want to explore it more despite feeling terrified by it. My friend, let's call them Reese, can see and feel spirits and had a horrible feeling, but still, I wanted to investigate. We experienced the spirit called the Lady in White. She was telling us to leave, but we didn't listen. A part of me wishes we did. We had an experience with a malicious and powerful entity that was putting me and my friend Simon into a trance, trying to lead us there. It was calling Reese's sister's name, telling her to go over to it. Then it revealed itself to everyone. We all saw the same figure, which appeared to be a morphing head with a smile. Reese said it wasn't human, its body was all crooked. The Lady in White told us to run, but I was so caught up in the trance that I had to be dragged away. Once I snapped out of it, I ran back to the car in terror. I believe that entity is what caused the death of the Lady in White, and she was trying to protect us along with the spirit attached to my 1960s doll named Ellie. We recorded the experience, but while the head wasn't captured on camera, other things were. We are all shaken up and took steps of protection before we even got home. If you do plan to investigate there, make sure you're protected. There's something demonic, and it will lead people towards it, maybe to possess them or cause harm. Don't go alone. It was mid-COVID with the shutdown in full effect, and we were bored AF. We took a long drive into the mountains and ended up at Looking Glass Falls. It was 3 a.m., pitch black, no moon. We left our headlights on and walked down to the bottom with our phones as flashlights, but we still couldn't see anything. As we stood there, we suddenly felt this presence, like it was all around us. My husband doesn't believe in any type of supernatural stuff, but the hair on his arms and neck was standing up, as was mine. We felt a fear so pervasive and all-encompassing that it stunned us for a few seconds. I looked at him and said, "Let's get the duck out of here," so we bolted up the stairs as fast as we could. It felt like something was touching our legs as we ran. I know you asked about the creepiest thing I've ever seen, but I really feel like we saw it, we just didn't know that we were seeing it. North Carolina, Greenville seems to have a ton of ghosts. I've seen one there, and a close friend also witnessed one. However, one experience I had with a few friends stands out. There used to be a railroad bridge leading out of New Bern heading north into what is now Bayboro, but in the 1970s it was all forest land. The railroad itself was no longer in use, the bridge and tracks abandoned. Following one of the battles in and around New Bern during the Civil War, a trainload of wounded men was dispatched to a hospital in Virginia. However, shortly after they crossed over the Neuse River, the train stopped. Whether it was out of fuel or the tracks had been torn up is unknown. And there the train sat for several days with no water, food, or medical care for the wounded. As you may expect, many died and were buried in shallow graves next to the tracks. I was living and working construction in Atlantic Beach at the time, and one of the old salts on my crew was from the Bayboro area and knew the story. So after work one Friday we jumped into the car and drove up to see the ghosts. The tale was you could see the lanterns they used to dig the graves at night and the cries of the neglected wounded. We drive down a couple of dirt roads and park on the abandoned tracks in the middle of the woods. We play the game of either rolling up the windows and dying of the heat or rolling them down and dying of the mosquitoes. It was the middle of August and not exactly a cool night. Around 1 a.m. there was a sudden blast of cold, not cool, air down the tracks. We all sat up, and it was followed by another blast of cold air. Dimly down the track to the north, we could see a flickering light. We figured that was enough and got the hell out of there. That bridge was torn down years ago, the tracks and the woods torn up, and the area now covered in condos. If the ghosts are still there, I have no idea. I was at my parents' house watching a football game one night while they were out of town. I didn't have cable, so I came over there. I remember during the game my eyes kept wandering all over the area, like a Spidey type sense was going off trying to tell me something was not right. Now I had to put the house back the way I found it before I left. I had to take some folding trays back downstairs and shut off some lights. I tell you that was one of the most harrowing experiences of my life, and I've been in combat. As I'm going down the stairs, I begin to know something is wrong at this point. It feels like I got 13 people all staring at me. There's this odd feeling like I'm somewhere I shouldn't be, and I need to leave right then, hell, now. So I'm coming up the stairs, and I hear a growl like a dog behind me. They don't have a dog or any pets that can make that noise. So then I run up the stairs, run to the panel for their security system to set the alarm, and I hear a dog panting as I'm setting the alarm. Again, no dog. So I run outside and shut and lock the door. When I turn back because I again feel like I'm being watched, in the entryway staring at me is a tall, slender, all black robed figure just staring and watching me. I drove off as fast as I could, and I have not been in there alone at night again. I really feel like that was a demon. I worked in a military office. Came to work super early, so I had to go through the office in the dark to reach the light switches. The only light was in the kitchen behind me. As I walked past the row of cubicles, I saw a silhouette of a tall man in uniform standing still facing an empty cubicle. I got startled and even apologized to him, but he did not react. I turned on the lights, and of course no one was there. Supposedly our building was previously used as a morgue. When I was a kid, I was living with my parents, along with my grandparents, in a farmhouse somewhere in the deep country. Growing up there I loved how spacious the yard was, admiring the playground my father and I built together, riding four-wheelers and crashing them into the garage. However, attached to this garage was a cellar, which gave me super eerie vibes. We kept old belongings and seasonal things in there. When my family would can/jar foods, they'd also store them in the attachment part of the cellar. Sometimes they'd have me retrieve items from inside, and I hated it every time. The door and buildings themselves were old and extremely creepy. I remember one time I was playing outside, and my family asked me to grab something for the yard from inside of the cellar. I went ahead and tried to find this item, but it was buried so deep within the place I had to crawl on top of stuff to get it. As I was climbing, I heard from my right side, which was where the attachment part was and always was super dark until you walked in to pull the string light, a raspy whispering voice calling my name to come closer. I looked over and felt my body go numb as I swear I saw something peering at me from within the darkness. A shadow of some kind that I didn't recognize. It didn't match up with anything on that side. I ran out without the item I was asked to grab and never went back in. Years later, I'm sitting at my grandma's new house having dinner when my mom tells me that a mother and 2 children died in that house and they remained there. The 2 imaginary friends I had as a kid were actually the dead children. I don't tell these stories, as I sound crazy. But I swear on everything, if you could have only lived it yourself. Spirit didn't let us out of my room. So I was about 16 years old and, at that time, very interested in ghosts, paranormal things, etc. My mom is, I wouldn't say medium, but highly esoteric and can see things in or around other humans. For example, she can feel bad energies and also describe dead loved ones of her customers standing beside them perfectly. If you want to hear more stories of my mom, just let me know. So her being so sensitive to those things did wake my interest even more. So I went online and researched ways to communicate with energies or spirits and found out a way to do so. I invited my sister and 2 of our neighbor kids to help and watch. I didn't want to do that alone, because of obvious reasons. We waited for my mother to leave because she specifically prohibited ever communicating with the other world. We wrote letters and numbers and also yes and no on a paper, cropped them out, and arranged them in a circle. We basically crafted a Ouija board. We lowered the shutters in my room, yes, we did that in my room, stupid, I know, and lit candles and placed them in different places in my room. I and my sister placed our hands on an upside-down drinking glass, and the neighbor kids watched from the bed. The first few times they laughed and chuckled when we said phrases like, "Is someone here who wants to talk with us?" Or, "If you want to communicate, please do that." After a few minutes, a few candles started to flicker. I didn't think much about it because candles usually flicker. But after some more time, some of them really started to freak me out. They started to look like someone tried to blow them out, you know, like when you want to blow out candles but don't use enough air, so you just blow the flame in one direction. And the glass started moving. I looked at my sister, and she looked at me, simultaneously asking if the other one was pushing it. We both got really freaked out, so we took our hands off the glass, and that freaking thing moved on its own. I got a panic attack, and we all screamed and ran to my door to get out. We closed it before. In hindsight, it was a very stupid idea. I pressed the handle of my door down, but that thing didn't move a bit. My sister and the neighbor kids started to help press it down. We leaned on it with all our body weight combined, but it didn't move an inch. The candles started to go out, and we just screamed and screamed. Eventually it opened, and we ran into the kitchen, into a corner, and just cried. From this day on I didn't sleep well in my room because I felt watched all the time, and my writing desk chair started moving on its own. I placed it under the desk, and the next morning it stood a good meter away from it. My mom also noticed that my room didn't feel right, like something lurks inside of it, and asked me if I did something stupid. Eventually I told her, and she was furious, saying that I could have brought much more evil into our apartment than a spirit that amuses itself by disturbing us. She did a ritual in my room, saying a few phrases, putting a protective circuit in it, and smoking it out with sage, and I was never disturbed by it again. Needless to say, I'll never do that again. One time something climbed on top of me while I was pretending to be asleep. I thought I'd heard my mom come into the room to make sure I'd gone to bed. I was a little kid and would stay up playing with my toys sometimes, so I lay very still and waited for her to leave. I heard her come over and suddenly had a huge weight on my chest, like she was leaning on me for some reason, and as a little kid I thought she was trying to startle me to see if I was actually asleep or not. I continued to be very still and remain calm. After a few moments, she stood back up and left the room. The thing is, this came up in conversation years later, and she just stared blankly at me and told me she has no idea what I'm talking about. It gives me chills knowing something crept across my room and climbed up on my chest, right in front of my face while my eyes were closed. If I'd opened my eyes, I have no idea what I would have seen staring back at me from just inches away. In my parents' house, as a child, I always heard someone press the switches at night to turn on the light, but the lights didn't turn on. It could take hours without stopping typing, but there was no one typing when I got up. Other nights you could always hear someone moving a set of keys, and when I got up to look, there was no one there. Everyone in the house heard it, but it was always constant. A girl I dated when I was young stayed home, and one night when we were in my room, a glowing figure that looked like a woman appeared in front of our bed. The figure only lasted about 10 seconds, but it was clearly seen that it was a young girl with long hair. The girl got very nervous and didn't want to talk about what we saw. Over the years I found out from the previous owner of the house that where I had the room was the room of her daughter, who died when she was young of tuberculosis. We are talking about the 60s in Spain, when many people did not have money to buy vaccines. When I was 15, I was in my parents' house listening and downloading music until 3 or 4 in the morning, as usual. I could hear dogs barking in the distance. At first I wasn't paying too much attention until I started hearing the neighbors' dogs go crazy as well. I thought it was a cat or something they were barking at, but the dogs sounded like they were very abnormally disturbed for some reason. I got out of bed and took a look through my window to see the cat that was doing the disturbance, but I realized it wasn't a cat at all. This woman with long hair and a white dress was floating in the air just 10 feet in front of me, outside my window. I always thought she looked a lot like the Ring girl. I literally froze in place because I couldn't process what I was seeing. However, when I suddenly heard my dogs barking, I reacted by closing the curtains and quickly going to my bed. I continued to hear the dogs barking in the distance for another 10 minutes until they faded away, almost like the entity was moving through the area. To this day I don't know what I saw, and no one believes me at all, but whenever I hear a strange sound outside, I don't go near the windows anymore. Unexplainable experience. Something weird just happened to my wife and me. We live in an apartment with a neighbor next to us and below us. We were watching TV, and all of a sudden we heard what sounded like someone vomiting. We initially suspected a neighbor, as our walls are somewhat thin, and we have previously heard them coughing or vomiting. However, this time it went on for almost 10 minutes. So we paused our show, and my wife went into the kitchen to see if she could hear better as to what was going on. All of a sudden she runs back into the living room and says she just saw a black shadow move in front of her. And at that moment the vomiting sound stopped, and we haven't heard it since. We've never had any weird experiences like this happen to us, so this was very odd, and we're kind of freaked out. I really hate this story, but here goes. I was 14 to 15 and was visiting family near Waco, Texas. They lived on this block with rundown homes, one of which was boarded up and had been empty for at least 10 years, from what they'd told me. We took flashlights and broke into the house one afternoon, because we were bored and our parents didn't pay attention to what dumb kids tended to do. The place was nasty as hell. Tons of cobwebs, walls marked up and falling to pieces, and some of the previous owner's furniture and belongings. We went down the hallway to the bedrooms to look in, and there was a nasty stain on the carpet in what looked like the main bedroom. That freaked 2 of the cousins out, so they left. 3 of us left. We wandered to the kids' room, and my older cousin told us this dumb, obviously fake story about how the man who had lived there ended his whole family and then ended himself in this weird satanic ritual. We weren't buying it, but we were also getting nervous as hell, because it felt like we were being watched. By that point, I wanted to leave, but I didn't have a flashlight. I begged my cousin to at least light the way to the window we came through, but she refused. I was adamant I was getting out. They were on the other end of the hallway, but I swear I heard someone walking behind me, dragging their feet on the carpet. Something pulled my hair, and I yelled. That scared my other cousin, who came running. She didn't have a flashlight either. The older cousin was by herself in the hallway. She suddenly screamed and came running after us, and I remember her hitting against the wall like she'd tripped. Later she said she'd seen a man in the open doorway where the stain had been and that he'd made a move toward her. When she ran, she said something had yanked her hair violently, and that was when she collided with the wall briefly. She also said she'd heard a man growling behind her. I didn't want to believe her, but her story hasn't changed in the years since, and she always gets pale and shaky when she talks about it. Years later, another cousin went in there, and she swears she heard a man and woman screaming. But there was no one in the house. Shortly after, the place got bulldozed, and I kind of wonder if anything spooky happens at whatever got built there. I have a couple. My dad's house is haunted and has been since we moved into it. The lady who owned it before us died. She didn't have any family, but she did have cats, a mixed breed dog, and a wolf-dog hybrid. When she passed, no one found her for a week or so. By then the dogs were both starving. The mutt was able to be rehabbed and rehomed. The wolf hybrid was too aggressive, in worse condition, and unable to be saved. Some odd things that happened were randomly smelling cat pee out of nowhere, hearing footsteps, etc., at night coming from upstairs. I heard claw clicks on the tile of the kitchen floor, but nothing was there, as well as hearing the sound of coarse fur brushing against my bedroom door. No dogs around when this happened. My dad woke up from feeling something lick his face while he was sleeping. The other story I have isn't much of a story, but my grandma saw the brown mountain lights on multiple occasions. She said it's the craziest thing she's ever experienced. I'm not a huge fan of sharing this story in real life, as most look at me like I'm crazy, but here we go. This incident happened in the late 90s in northern Maine. I was 9 years old, riding my bike on a shortcut road/path wide enough for a vehicle back to my family's cottage all by myself. I want to note this was on our land too. And the neighbors surrounding us all got along with our family. I had ridden this path dozens of times and never once felt unsafe until that day. The ride went normal on my way to the other end of this path. The ride back is when things got weird. I was 3/4 of the way back when it started to feel like I was being watched. But then I heard thudding and looked behind me only to see what I can describe as Bigfoot power walking / almost running towards me. It was not a bear on hind legs. Bears don't move that fast on 2 legs, and I had seen black bears in person. They don't even remotely resemble what I saw that day. I pedaled as hard as I could all while listening to the heavy thudding behind me. As I came up on the last corner before it was only 100 or so feet from the cottage, I ditched the bike and ran. The last part was an uphill dirt path. There was no way I would have had enough momentum to make it up without struggling or wiping out. I ran as fast as I could into the cottage, screaming and crying about being chased by Bigfoot. My grandmother was skeptical, as were the rest of my family, which I get, and I can only imagine what that sounded like to them at the time. When I told them I left my bike, my grandfather, 2 uncles, and stepdad went to retrieve my bike, on foot. All 4 made it about 25 feet in before returning to get shotguns and the truck to go retrieve my bike. They said they felt like they were being watched, and the woods were silent. The only thing my adult brain can come up with was someone in a ghillie suit or a hyper-realistic Bigfoot costume that was over 7 feet tall and footsteps that made a loud thudding. However, that would be going through an awful lot of trouble just to scare a child on a bike. Either way, that was the last time I ever went down that shortcut, let alone on my bike alone anywhere or in the woods. Call me crazy, but I know what I saw, and I know 4 grown men don't just unanimously decide to go get guns and a truck for no reason. My first unexplained experience. My first paranormal experience happened when I was about 7 years old. I am 22 now. Before I start the story, I think it is important to mention that my family and I live 20 minutes from the nearest town, in the mountains, surrounded by the woods, with no neighbors. Just to keep in mind. Now the story, it was summertime, so that meant that my dad would take me and my sister into town to go hang out and swim at the river with our friends. We did this basically every day in the summer. And with summer came last-minute plans, and on this particular day my sister got invited to have a sleepover at her friend's house, which my parents agreed to. With that being said, I thought it was only fair that if my sister got to have a sleepover, I could. I remember wearily calling my mom and asking because she wasn't the biggest fan of people coming over to the house at the last minute, but she agreed. My friend and I were so excited that as soon as we got to my house, we immediately went up to my bedroom to start getting the room ready while my parents were making dinner. That's when we saw it. My friend and I turned around to see a stranger in my doorway. This wasn't just scary because there was a stranger in my house, but it was even more scary because of his demeanor. He was dressed in a white wife-beater tank top and baggy jeans that didn't fit. He hadn't shaved, had yellow teeth, a scary smile, and greasy hair. He is what I would call the epitome of white trash. Obviously, since he was a stranger in my house, I screamed. And so did my friend. When we screamed, this man just laughed and turned around and walked away. I followed him. He walked down the hallway, and he turned the corner, which led right towards the kitchen where my parents were cooking dinner. I turned the corner just a moment after him, and he was gone. I was met by my parents asking why I was screaming. I explained to them everything, and they saw how terrified we were that my dad went to check the house. This is so strange to everyone because of so many reasons. 1. There was nowhere this man could have gotten between me and my parents to get out of the house. 2. I have very protective dogs, they didn't even sense that someone was in the house. 3. My dad checked the whole house and even the perimeter outside, there was no trace of anything. I still don't know what I would call this other than unexplainable. I think it was probably a spirit, but I really have no idea. I do know that everyone still remembers it. My home is built over ancient burial grounds. During the construction of the foundations, the recovery of ancient bones and funerary items led to their transfer to museums and other burial mounds. So for a long time, I experienced many strange things, including the rest of the family. But most of them don't want to talk about it, they just want to act like everything's fine. However, yes, to answer your question, they can definitely speak and talk. Often when I'm sleeping alone in my bedroom, I'll hear someone scream in my ear, or when I'm sitting alone in a living room or common space, on several occasions I'll hear a voice talking or whispering random things. Yet I have no clue where it is coming from. But as you've mentioned, not all are evil/demonic. Most, from what I've experienced, are just wanderers or passers-by. Often they may not pay any attention to you. Though a few others are, unfortunately, the exact opposite. Some of them like to pester you or play games to grab your attention. Though most only mess around with you if you provide them a reason to. And more often than not, they often look like large human-sized blobs of shadow from what I've seen, or like a really dark or grayish mist that moves and shifts around in a human-like figure, unsettling the first time you spot one. It seems as though your entire mind is spiraling into disarray, causing you to become completely immobilized. Moreover, they come in different intensities. Some are a lot more potent, others less. Some can open/close doors. Flick switches on and off. Switch devices on/off. They can also move things from where you left them or even hide them. They can even toss objects or push objects off tables. They can even make old light bulbs pop if it's too bright. I had to completely replace them with LED bulbs. I had a jukebox/radio that randomly switched on and changed to a music channel, then the volume knob turned to the max. This all happened as I was sitting on the couch, just watching. However, both cats and dogs can definitely detect the sounds from the jukebox/radio, or at least seem to respond to them for some reason. Because of this, I cannot raise a cat. Whenever I bring a cat into my home, it becomes extremely agitated within just a few hours, scratching the door nonstop and frantically trying to escape. And if I open the door, the cat just runs away and often never comes back. Once, I recall, I was sound asleep in my bedroom alone. I woke up and thought it was cold, so I grabbed the AC remote and increased the temperature on the air conditioner, then left it beside me on the bed and went to sleep. A few minutes later, the AC remote gets tossed hard right at my mouth, almost busting my lower lip. I looked around, and no one's there. Moreover, you can't have back and forth conversations with them. They're not lucid like us or operate with the same logic or social contracts we have. Thus, even the way they talk doesn't always make much sense. Though one thing I picked up on is that most like to hide and don't like people seeing them. They prefer being hidden. However, they are frequently not in your immediate vicinity, rather, they are positioned directly above you on the ceiling. As absurd as it may sound, the realization of this fact truly gave me a sense of unease. And if they make contact with you, or if you accidentally collide with one, it feels as though electricity is coursing through your entire body, your hair stands on end, and you experience a powerful, tingling shock that travels up your spine and into your head, causing you to shudder and tremble. I believe that some individuals may even experience a full-blown seizure if the shocks are sufficiently intense. My weirdest one was looking out the kitchen window as a kid and seeing someone dressed like a ghost, sheet with eyes cut out, walk by. The problem was that with the way the house was laid out, the window was easily 10 feet off the ground, or more. The top of the ghost's head was at the top of the window, like they were walking by at ground level. The old house had raccoons and squirrels living in the attic and roof. Always on edge because something was always scurrying around. A dirty basement with stone walls is starting to collapse. Place always had me on edge as a kid. Once a few years ago, I had a long break, and I was asleep in my bedroom of my family home. On that day, I woke up a little later than usual, during the early afternoon. After washing my face and brushing my teeth, then getting dressed, I stepped out of my bedroom and went to the living room area. Once there, the television was on, yet no one was there. I thought it rather unusual, as it was the afternoon time, when regularly I'd find someone lounging there. I continued through the living room and saw the door to my parents' bedroom slightly open. I stepped in. Their bedroom is rather large and has its own kind of lounge area. At the very end of it, roughly 10 yards away, besides a few tall wooden cabinets, I saw my mother quietly standing there, just staring at me. And for some reason, she was all dressed up, as if ready to go out. I looked her way and said, "Good morning, Mom. Are you going out somewhere?" But she just silently stood there, with an unblinking stare. After a few awkward moments of silence, I repeated, "Good morning, Mom." Yet she just stood there, completely still, her stare wider, still fixated on me. "Mom. Good morning," I repeated in a louder voice. And in that instant, from the dressing room, just a few yards away from where I stood, I could hear my mother's voice. "Yes. Good morning. I'm changing. How many times are you going to say good morning?" she said. "Heard you the first time." In that moment, I stood stricken with horror as I realized that what stood there was not my mother. My thoughts raced, yet I had not the slightest idea what was standing right in front of me, as the silent figure stood there staring back at me. I said a few prayers as my hands and lips began to tremble. In that instant, the image began to dissolve into a very unusual black smoke that quickly dissipated and dissolved into the surroundings, and in just a few moments, the smoke was completely gone from sight. Just a few seconds later, my mother stepped out of her dressing room. I took a deep breath in and quickly regained my composure. We began with the usual small talk. Yet I decided not to tell her what I saw, as I'm aware that it'll just upset her, so I decided it would be wiser not to tell her. Besides, if I ever did, she may refuse to sleep in her bedroom for the remainder of the month. I hate talking about this, so I rarely go into the details, but the sun is shining and I'm listening to Disco Face, so it's feeling pretty safe and fun right now. I have altered some details to protect my identity and the location, as it is private property. When I was around 9, I was in a fancy private school in England because my mother was a teacher there. The school had a mansion on the grounds, which had originally been built in the early 1700s. During the summer holidays I had free rein to roam around and was basically 99% alone, as my mother went to London and just left me there. So I spent a lot of time exploring the mansion. I had been told not to go to the East Wing because it was reserved for guests and needed to remain clean. But I noticed when guests stayed, they didn't stay there, so at one point I decided to be naughty and go explore there. I immediately got an uncomfortable feeling there. At first I thought it was because I just wasn't allowed there, but as I peeped into rooms and realized they weren't set up as guest rooms but were being used as general storage for furniture for school events, I could have sworn someone was following me and kept spinning around trying to catch them. I knew only one person should have been in the mansion, the groundskeeper, and he was not the sort of adult who'd try and play with me. He was a yeller lol, so I started to get anxious. Was someone living in here secretly? Then I found the ballroom. I pulled open these double doors, and there was this mirrored ballroom with the outside windows all shuttered, so it was fairly dark inside. The sun was pouring through the hall windows, and it was a bright midsummer afternoon. I stepped into the room, intending to open one of the shutters so I could see what the room looked like in the sunlight and see if there was a piano I could play, but froze about 4 steps into the room. It was ice cold, and suddenly all the hair on my body stood on end. I couldn't breathe. This terror gripped me like I've never felt in my life. All sound stopped. I couldn't move at first either, but after what felt like forever, and was probably just a second, I found I could move my eyeballs, then my head if I forced it. I turned my head to the left until I was able to look just over my shoulder, and there in the corner of the room just behind me was this thing. The only way I can describe it is as a person sitting on their back with their knees brought up tight to their chest. Their arms were wrapped around their legs, and their chin was sitting on their knees. And they were looking at me. They were all burned up, like, absolutely charcoal. No lips. So all I saw were these white eyes and clenched white teeth and this horrible shape in the corner. The shadows got darker. And I just knew I was going to die if I couldn't get out of that room. Have you ever experienced a dream in which you find yourself in the middle of a road, unable to move as a car or truck approaches, watching it get closer and closer? That's what I was feeling, but I knew I wasn't dreaming. My feet were slowly forced backwards. I'm not sure what gave me the strength. It felt like hours and was probably only seconds, but I painfully shuffled backwards, never looking away from this thing's eyes until I hit the doorway and fell backwards out of the room. As I hit the floor of the hallways, everything was normal again. The sun was shining through the windows, the ballroom in front of me looked normally shadowy, I could breathe, birds sang. It took me probably 30 seconds or so to catch my breath and start standing up. My limbs were shaking, and I was lightheaded and panting like I'd just run a mile. I ran out of there like the groundskeeper had seen me. I have never experienced anything like it since. It's my only encounter with someone actually what we'd call evil, and no, it wasn't a demon, it was a human entity, and thankfully I never ran into him again. Furthermore, duck that guy, he was the worst in life, and death obviously didn't fix him. I lived in a house that I believe contained 2 entities, a demonic entity and an evil spirit or mimic. It originally started with feeling like there was a body buried under my bed. This was a trailer, and when that feeling started to go away, I started to see shadows, and my dog started getting very protective, growling at nothing and guarding me in rooms. One of the entities eventually started mimicking both my dog, a small border collie, and a larger dog. It also mimicked me when I was at work, which I caught on camera when it called my dog in my voice from down the hall. After the entity realized that its actions weren't bothering me too much, it began waking me up by talking to me. The voice would come from above me, usually in mid-air. It just sounded like a regular man's voice, tbh. It would get pissed off when I acknowledged other spirits. My late father-in-law is one that I periodically interact with, and it would lash out. A few times, I thought my house was on fire because the voice would get angry and create sounds that resembled a fire breaking out in the ceiling and ripping through the house, only stopping when it realized I didn't care. Ultimately, it started showing itself to me, and that is what scared me shitless. It would take the shape of people or animals in my house. The demon appeared as a massive, dense shadow, approximately 7 to 8 feet tall, resembling a cloaked figure with blurry edges that loomed over me. The other spirit was extremely scary. It would stand on its knees and stare at me at night. Its neck was broken, and its head would sit on its shoulder, and it had serious burns to its face, either chemically melted or burned in a fire. Remember, it would try to scare me with fire. I am unsure which spirit was responsible for the mimicking, but I suspect that the burned spirit may have died in a fire nearby, as my area is known for unmarked First Nation graves, which could explain the sensation of a buried body. Was the spirit angry or unable to move on? I'm not sure. But whatever the energy was, it was brought through the demon. It ended up following me to my next home, as I fled that trailer within a week. It hid for a while until it showed itself again, this time bigger and clearer. They will show themselves only how they want to, but I've seen many spirits, entities, mimics, and general things that are just there to bother you. The one thing I've always listened to, though, is that you should believe in how it shows itself. It's always a version of what it is. And to follow your gut. My gut told me something was gravely wrong months before it ever interacted with me, and I wish I'd listened to it. Last year I went through 3 surgeries. All year I was in pain, unable to even walk. Something dark clung to me. I wouldn't say it was evil, but it definitely fed on my pain and angst. One night I had a dream, more like an astral exit, in which I was walking through my house feeling so afraid, like something was following me. When I woke up I could see, more with my mind's eye than my physical eyes, an entity. It looked sad and cold and like it was pushing against me, like it was trying to get some of my warmth, if that makes sense. To your question, the thing appeared in my mind as very thin in his limbs but with a fat belly, blue/silver skin, no hair on his body or head, a peanut-shaped head, a long nose, a very sad expression, pointy ears, oily skin, and naked. It neither spoke nor attempted to communicate with me. It would make noises in my house to scare me. It also fed on my pain and the angst of medical diagnoses. I could tell it was near because I suddenly felt cold and experienced chills that traveled up my legs. Usually, chills go down our spine, right? While simultaneously hearing knocking on my walls, roof, floor, and doors. I believe it was a larva from the lower astral realm. Not very smart, just inducing fear to feed on it. It went away with lots of prayers, candles, and an improvement in my health and emotional state. Sharing an unexplained experience. Hello. New here. I'd like to share an encounter I had as a child, in hopes someone here might be able to explain what the hell it was. When I was around 5 to 6 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night, unsure of the time. I heard a very deep, almost demonic voice repeating the number 16 over and over. I happened to look out into the hall while still in bed and saw a black figure in the hall. Everyone else in the house was asleep. As a child, I was horrified and didn't want to investigate. This is something that has stuck with me into my adulthood. I'm almost 22 now. And I guess I was just wondering if anyone could figure out what I experienced. There have been several other paranormal experiences in that house. My father is the only one that still lives there, but this is the one that bothers me most. To this day I'm not sure what I saw, but my best guess is that it was some kind of a demonic entity. In my local town, there is an abandoned gas station. I'd say it's roughly 20 to 25 years old and has been sitting empty for the majority of that time. It's located on the edge of the town where many cars do tend to pass by, so I have no idea why it was abandoned in the first place. One day, the curiosity got the better of me, and I went into it while being careful so that no one from outside would see me. What really caught me off guard is that the place was in surprisingly good condition. I mean, my town sure has many homeless people, so I expected trash, broken bottles, and the like to be all over the place. But it was empty. It felt as though it had been left just yesterday, despite the thick layer of dust and the poor condition of the ceiling. To say the place had an eerie atmosphere would be a gross understatement. But still I continued exploring. Connecting to the main room were several hallways, all leading to the back. After roughly 5 minutes of walking around, I stumbled upon a very strange room. During the time when the gas station was active, it must have been some kind of freezer. There were no windows, and the floor and the walls were covered in ceramic tiles. What was strange about the situation was that a symbol, which I now believe was a pentagram, had been drawn on the floor with a red permanent marker, and several candles were placed around its outer circle. Understandably, I was terrified and jumped when I heard my name being whispered. There are no words in human language that can do justice to the fear I felt when I looked up, and in a hole in the ceiling, I saw what looked to be a silhouette of a face with two bright, unblinking eyes staring right at me. I was so terrified that my lungs refused to breathe in the air or let it out with a shriek. Thankfully, after a few seconds, that felt like an eternity, the thing crawled back. As soon as it disappeared, I regained control of my legs and proceeded to run out of there as quickly as I could. I never went back there, and even a gun pointed at my head will not make me go into that building ever again. What haunts me is that when it crawled back, there was no creaking sound at all. Absolutely zero sound. If it had been a person, I feel like what was left of the ceiling would have collapsed under their weight. So that's my story. If anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to provide. I've never shared this anywhere before, and I hate recounting the story because it genuinely ducked me up for a bit. I was working at a nursing home as a CNA on night shifts at the time. I had one other CNA as my partner and a nurse there, and that was the only other staff. We had just finished our rounds, and all the residents were asleep or at least in bed. My coworkers and I decided to play cards for a bit until someone needed something / our next rounds. We set up in the dining room near the serving window, which had a heavy wooden door that latched shut. The lights in the kitchen were on, and the door was crooked on its hinges, so there was a gap at the bottom. I believed I saw a figure pass by and chuckled, assuming it was a resident experiencing the munchies and searching for a midnight snack, which occasionally occurred. I told my coworkers I was going to check it out. I went into the kitchen, and there wasn't anyone there. I felt a pit in my stomach and walked around the counter and looked in the pantry but didn't see anyone. I shrugged it off and shut off the kitchen light, and as soon as the door swung shut behind me, we heard one huge loud bang, like a construction site or a giant clap of thunder, that loud. Against every instinct I had and out of concern for my residents, I carefully opened the door and turned the light on again. Every single door in that kitchen was open. Every cabinet, every drawer, the fridges, the ovens, the dishwasher, the ducking microwave. Everything that could possibly be opened. We just looked at each other, silently shut all the doors back up, and watched Cartoon Network on the same couch in the TV room until our next rounds. We asked the residents in the morning if they had heard anything, and no one did. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, and it remains completely unexplainable. Unexplained paranormal experience 2 years ago. I had a profound paranormal experience when I was up in Culver, Indiana, 2 years ago, and it has been bothering me ever since. I was in Culver, Indiana, staying at the Vonnegut house with my family for my twin brother's graduation. The house is very old because it was built in 1889. I was sitting on the deck on the porch swing that was nearest to the door on my phone listening to some music and enjoying myself. It was the middle of the day, around 12 o'clock, and it was bright and beautiful outside. All of a sudden I heard what sounded like small rocks hitting the deck of the sunroom that were being thrown in my general direction. When I looked to see who threw them, I was thinking it was my cousin trying to be annoying. But what I saw was this almost person-shaped black mass / apparition that moved to the right and then darted off, and I could clearly hear footsteps when that thing moved. Keep in mind that it manifested itself in broad daylight. I went to look at what was thrown at me, and it was 3 pieces of gravel that were around the area below the sunroom. And when I looked down over the sunroom rail and to the right, nothing was there. I was well above 7 feet high off the ground due to the sunroom being elevated, and my cousin, who was only about 8 or 9, couldn't possibly be tall enough to be visible through the railing. That thing's head was a little below the top of the railing, so it must have been over 7 feet tall. Needless to say, that experience scared me shitless, and I can say that I am now no longer a skeptic. Does anyone have a clue as to what I witnessed on that day? There were 2 events that I couldn't explain. The first one, at around 7 or 8 years old, I was living at my mom's family house, where I shared a room with my mom and grandma. One night I was woken up by a really bizarre and loud sound coming from a corner of the room. It's difficult to describe. It goes ha 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 ha. The sound of it wasn't something a human could make, I'm certain. The sound would repeat itself for about a minute, then stop. I was scared. My first thought was it's a ghost, so I prayed in my mind and pretended to sleep until it stopped. This sound would show up every few nights. One particular night when this sound was happening, my grandmother actually woke up to go to the toilet. She seemed completely oblivious to the sound. It was a loud sound. When I asked her the next day, she said she didn't hear anything. After about 2 weeks, this sound stopped coming. Second one, I was 5 years old, living at my dad's family house. One night, the power went out, and the adults were busy trying to fix it. I went out to the backyard where my family's maid's room was. The maid was there, sitting outside her room with my dog, so I decided to chill with her. A small drain separated her room from the main house. Suddenly I could hear a distinct, shh, sound coming from the drain. It's not a snake hissing, it really sounded like a person making a hushing sound. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I heard it again and again, and I started to feel something wasn't right about this sound. Around this time my dog became uneasy and ran back to the main house. I glanced at my maid, and her look told me she could hear the sound too, but we were trying not to acknowledge it. I was getting scared, so I stood up to leave, but my maid held me back, shook her head, and made me sit back down. I think she did not want me to walk over the drain. We sat there in silence until the power came back on. My maid brought me back to the house and told my family what happened. My grandfather wasn't surprised at all and noted that the house was built on an old graveyard. Supernatural stuff happens commonly, such as my late grandma's spirit lingering around the house. I personally never encountered her, but my family did. I can think of 3 things that I've witnessed that I cannot adequately explain. The first one was something that happened in the late 80s, when I was sharing an apartment with 2 friends. I was lying half awake late at night in my room when the entire room was briefly lit up by a flash of super bright light. It was as if someone had set off a big camera flash gun. I got the fear and did the most pathetic thing imaginable. I pulled the duvet up over my head. After a little while, maybe 10 to 15 minutes, it happened again. No noise or anything, just this flash of bright light. I was ducking terrified, too scared to move. At some point I fell asleep, woke up, and went to work. I figured I must have dreamed it. The very next night it happened again, only that night it only happened once. I lived in that place for about another year, in retrospect one of the happiest times of my life. Nothing like that ever happened again. The apartment was a nice place, with no bad vibes or anything like that. The second thing was when I worked as a PA engineer in Newcastle, England. One of my colleagues gave me a lift home after we packed the PA system away. His younger brother was with us as well. I don't know if anyone listening to this is familiar with Newcastle/Gateshead/Blaydon, but we drove up from Blaydon towards Greenside on Lead Road. As we drove along Lead Road, which is this narrow twisty road, not the back of Beyond by any means but still about 2 miles from the nearest settlement and very dark, we saw these 3 figures walking on the other side of the road, walking in the opposite direction to us. They were short, like the height of 10-12-year-old kids, all the same height. Their clothing resembled what a young child might wear if you told them to dress up as a ghost for a Halloween party. They each appeared to be wearing a sheet draped over their heads, each with a pair of eye holes. They were walking with a strange rolling gait, and they were walking in step with each other. My colleague slowed down a little bit, and the 3 of us, in this big old Ford Granada car, glided past these things, and we all copped a good look at them. I can still remember looking out of the back window of the car, seeing these things walking away from us, lit up by the red taillights of the car. At no point did the things acknowledge us or react to us in any way. This experience still weirds me out, 30 years later. Lastly, and my apologies for droning on, I used to work in a bike shop in New England and would occasionally pedal the 20-mile bike ride back to my former house. Part of the journey was a 3 to 4 mile run along an old disused railway line that had been converted into a country park. It was always pitch black along there, but apart from getting jump scared by the occasional hooting owl, I never witnessed anything weird. One night though, I was pedaling along, feeling pretty mellow, when I saw this thing. Imagine you took a big sheet of super black paper, and you rolled it in such a way as to make an 8-foot-high narrow cone. Along the way on this path were picnic tables, the sort that has a pair of bench seats attached to the table. Now imagine if you took your 8 cone and sat it down on one of these seats. That's what I saw. I saw a black cone, so dark that it seemed to absorb the little ambient light along this dark path. It was 8 feet tall, and, I swear, it was sitting at a picnic table. I remember pedaling slowly past it, looking at it and not kind of understanding that which I was seeing. Then after about 10 seconds I became so frightened that even Bernardino would have struggled to keep up with me. That's all I got. The 3 figures still get to me a bit, the other 2 did at the time, less so now. My mom, brother, and I were staying at my grandmother's house. I woke up in the middle of the night on the floor and heard the door slam. All of us were staying in the same room, so we all woke up. We all have had some experiences here in the past, so we knew it was some spirit. I got up and went back to bed. My mom was mad, so she put a heavy suitcase in front of the door before going to bed. Later on in the night, my brother is on the floor, and the suitcase is knocked over, and the slam of the door wakes us all up again. My mom became even angrier, got up, and began to speed walk out of the room to essentially yell at what she thought was a ghost. I went and followed her. When we got to the living room, we both saw a really dark black mist crawling on the ceiling. I was terrified, and my mom's anger turned into fear. She calmly asked if it could please stop because we will be leaving in the next couple of days. We both headed back to our room and put all 3 of our suitcases up against the door. We tried to go back to sleep, but I was just having a difficult time because I knew that my mom/grandma had seen this black mass beforehand, but I hadn't. It was dark in the living room already, but this was so much darker than the dark. It was the scariest thing I have seen. After that, we were all sleeping on the same bed. I was trying to go to bed, and then I turned and saw the black mist swirling above us on the ceiling. I didn't say anything and turned towards my mom with the blanket above my head. I didn't sleep much that night. A couple of months later, while watching TV, my grandma and grandpa saw a black mass that appeared to be in the form of a man just standing there. My grandma just asked my grandpa if he was seeing what she was seeing, and he replied, "Yup." I don't tell this story much because people think we are all crazy. My dad has to back us up whenever we tell experiences at that house because he was definitely a skeptic before visiting a few times. The thing that made him believe in ghosts was when he was alone there one day. He heard footsteps walking around the house and called out to see if anyone was there. Nobody was, and ever since then, he believes. My first paranormal encounter. I come from a Christian household. Father is a pastor, and mother was a minister. So I never didn't believe in the supernatural. When I was in high school, around 9th grade, I was sitting up watching TV in my room. After a while, I decided to call it a night and turn the television off, followed by the lights, and laid down. It is very important for me to say that what I encountered was literally seconds after I laid my head down. There is no possibility that I fell asleep and imagined all of this. I was fully awake, and I've always struggled with sleep. I don't simply drift off. I don't know how to describe what I saw, felt, or just knew. It wasn't a vision. More of a thought, something internal. But the thought was so clear I could almost see it. I just really don't know how to put it into words. But as soon as I laid my head down, I saw/imagined something hauling up the stairs and knew it was coming straight to my room. Again, I was fully awake, I didn't doze off and imagine this. I saw/felt/knew this and tried to jump up, but my body was completely paralyzed. My eyes were wide open, but they got heavier and heavier. I literally could not keep them open. The more they closed, the more I saw my bedroom door start to creep open. I just started chanting Jesus, Jesus, Jesus over and over in my head. My eyes eventually shut against my will. And I just kept saying the name of Jesus in my head, being that I couldn't move. While I'm lying there, I get this extremely intense tingling in my lower spine. It wasn't painful, but it was so intense that I would have definitely preferred pain over the sensation. After about 15 seconds I gained control of my body. I sat straight up and screamed at the top of my ducking lungs. My brother ran into my room, and I was so hysterical that he just let me sleep with him without even being able to understand the story. Scariest shit of my life. Since that night, I have randomly experienced night terrors accompanied by sleep paralysis. The night terrors are ducking horrible and so real. I haven't experienced them in a long time. However, I feel the same sensation every time it occurs. I get that same tingling in my spine. I hate it. Oh. And days later I asked my brother if he remembered if my door was open or shut. He said it was open. I, under no circumstances then or now, have ever slept with my door open. Looking for people with similar experiences. So, I want to describe a series of strange events to see if anyone other than me has experienced anything similar. It all started when I was about 16. For the purpose of clarity, I'm going to explain a few things first. All of this took place at my childhood home, a 30-acre farm in rural Missouri. Our entire house was surrounded by a cattle panel fence. It all started when I was 16. I began seeing what appeared to be a man standing just out of view near our fence line after the sun went down. I would go tell my father, and he would go look. Only to find no one and no evidence to show that someone had been there at all. Even in snow, no footprints or displaced snow. My mom and dad began thinking that I was just imagining it. This person/figure, at this time, had done nothing but either stand completely still or run from the fence and into the woods. Hell, I even thought that I was imagining it at one point. That all changed the night it turned its attention to my mom. For context, we had an outside wood furnace behind our house that, at the time, was our only source of heat for the winter. This furnace had to be refilled with wood often. We decided to surround it with a wooden privacy fence that was about 8 feet tall. The reason behind this was to keep the icy winds off of you while you put wood in the furnace. One night, my dad was working a night shift, and I was asleep. I was woken up by the sound of screaming outside the house. I jumped out of bed and ran outside. I booked it towards the screaming, shotgun in hand. I kicked the gate to the fence down to see my mother crying hysterically in the corner of the enclosed area, clutching a small hand axe for dear life. I walked her inside, and after she calmed down, she told me she had heard what sounded like a quiet chuckle from outside the privacy fence. When she called to whoever made the sound, she said that she assumed it was me. The fence began being violently shaken. The screaming I heard was her yelling at me to stop. She told me that she wasn't truly scared until she heard the front door slam, because she realized at that moment that the only person who would be coming outside was me, which meant that I couldn't have been the one shaking the fence. She now denies any of that happened. After that incident, things got weird. I'm not going to name everything that ever happened, but I'll tell a few more stories to give you a little better of an idea of what I might be dealing with. One night, I'm sneaking out, planning to go see my girlfriend at the time. I'm maybe 17. My truck was loud, so, to avoid waking my parents up, I put the truck in neutral and began pushing up the driveway. When I reach the edge of my driveway, I hear gravel crunching rapidly behind me. I turn around and see a shadowy figure sprinting in my direction. Maybe 10 feet away, and closing the gap between us quickly. I did the only thing I could think to do. I closed my eyes, planted my feet, ducked my head, and leaned in with my shoulder in preparation to take a hit. After a second I realized that I didn't hear anything. I reluctantly opened my eyes to see absolutely nothing. I threw caution to the wind, fired up my truck, and took off. I tell my parents, and, once again, I'm met with "you're just imagining it" and other similar bullshit. Fast forward a few months, and I'm working at my town's local Walmart. I unloaded freight trucks. So the hours I worked were super weird. 4 p.m. to 1 a.m. were my shifts. So I didn't get home till super late. I pull into the driveway one night and notice that the garage light is on and the garage door is open slightly. My parents use the garage as a place to smoke their cigarettes during the winter, so it wasn't out of the realm of normal. I exit my vehicle, and I hear my mom call for me from the garage. "James?" I confirmed it was me, and then she said, "Come here for a second." I asked her why, and in her patented angry mom voice she said, "Just come here." So I roll my eyes and walk to the garage. I open the door, very annoyed and cold. I don't see my mom, though. I called out for her 2 or 3 times and got no answer. I didn't walk inside. I wasn't even afraid, I was just pissed, so I said something along the lines of "I'm not going to come in there so you can jump scare me," which was something my mom liked to do. I walked to the house and opened the door, and then I was scared. I saw my mom and dad, sound asleep on the couch together. I have more stories, but they are more of the same things happening on different days. Before you suggest a ghost is behind this, we moved into this house when I was 8 or 9, and nothing like this happened until my teens. I live in the Appalachian Mountains in New Hampshire. Creepy is a normal occurrence. Yesterday at work, I work at a small family-owned motel with 10 cottages, 2 playgrounds, and a pool, which is more empty as we are closed for the season. I was folding laundry and had the double doors open so I could see the whole property. I was wearing headphones and not paying attention when I heard my name being called. I walk out a few steps and look around to find nothing. Back to folding, headphones back on, and I heard it again, so I take my headphones off and go look again. This time, I took the golf cart out to do a quick drive around. Found nothing. Went back, but no headphones this time. I then hear splashing and kids playing. I can see the pool in both playgrounds, and everything is empty. Later that afternoon, behind the motel, I thought I saw someone walking in the field, so I texted my boss, and she checked the cameras, nothing. This stuff happens almost daily here. Though the creepiest things I've had happen all happen while spending time in the national forest. Had a tree follow us for 3 hours. Knocks and things being thrown. So many weird things. Also, almost everyone in my community has a UFO story. I've seen 6 or 7 unexplained flying objects. I live half an hour from where Betty and Barney Hill were abducted. We live with the weird and unexplained here. I encountered a demon this morning. I was awakened by a demon this morning. I am 18 years old, a born-again Bible-believing Christian, and I have a very good understanding of the spiritual realm. In fact, it is part of my testimony. I'm a thrill seeker and almost wanted to experience the supernatural, until it happened. I've never been more scared and felt such fear in my life. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and made my way to the edge of my bedroom in the dark. I was on my way to make my nightly trip to the bathroom. From the kitchen, I saw that all the motion sensor lights were on outside my house, illuminating my backyard and front porch. When I left my room to go to the bathroom, they all shut off simultaneously. I was weirded out by the moment, as something must have turned them on. I tried to shrug it off, as I was tired and didn't want to think about it. My discernment said otherwise in the back of my mind, but I went to sleep anyway. I woke up at 6 sharp to a quiet but audible whispering that seemed to be inside my room. The room was pitch black, and my eyes were completely open. My room was cold as ice, like it was freezing. The second thing I noticed was the whispering. It sounded loud enough to be audible. It was not English, it sounded like Hebrew or maybe Latin. I think it was dark speech, like the Nahash. It was coming from near the end of my bed. The vibe of the room was all wrong. I could feel it through my entire body, fear was in every fiber of my being. Hearing the entity speaking, my heart was pounding out of my chest. I could move, but I was so frozen in fear I didn't want to. I could feel this entity, it was evil and of the enemy. I couldn't see anything but noise from how dark my room was, and I thought I saw static making up the silhouette of a figure, or a dark form, in the darkness of my room. I started rebuking in the name of Jesus, and it disappeared. The vibe of the room turned back to normal, and I felt safe again. This is my first time really encountering a principality in person, so if anyone has any input on what exactly I may have encountered, or maybe how it somehow gained access to me, I'd love to hear some feedback. My ex was a practical joker. About a year after they died, I came home from work and turned on the vanity light in the bathroom to get ready for bed. Midway through brushing my teeth, the light, multiple bulbs, shut off. Despite flipping the switch several times, nothing happened. I switched on the overhead light, and it functioned properly. I thought I had accidentally cut a wire while drilling holes for a shelf the day before, so I went to the basement to turn off the breaker and deal with it after getting some sleep. When I opened the panel, it was already off. I repeatedly flipped the breaker, climbed back up, and attempted to turn on the light again. Nothing. Went back to the basement and turned off the breaker. Go back upstairs and make sure the lights in the bathroom are dead. I walked into the bedroom and realized that the breaker had also turned off all the lights and outlets in my bedroom. Muttering a string of obscenities, I went back to the basement. The breaker was already on when I opened the panel. Again. At this point, I was so exhausted and frustrated that I thought, screw it, the house can catch fire. I need sleep. I flipped the breaker off and on, then went back up. I reset my alarm clock and crawled into bed. Literally the moment I pulled the duvet up over me, I saw a light come on in the hallway. I get back out of bed, and that damn vanity light is lit up and working fine. Later that afternoon, as I drove to work, I heard a song start playing. I thought it was odd, because I had never heard that song on the radio ever. The first time I heard it was when I was somewhere with the ex. I bought the CD, and it had gotten stuck in my car stereo months before they died. It wouldn't play or eject, and I didn't care enough to spend the money to get the stereo fixed. After they died, I either listened to the radio or drove in silence. I looked over, and instead of the radio station I always listened to, I saw CD track 02 on the screen. I let the song play through, and it just stopped after that song. I tried to eject the CD, it wouldn't eject or play again. I eventually sold the car with that CD still stuck in it. My only paranormal experience ever. I have always believed in the paranormal, alternate dimensions, and extraterrestrials. I just generally believe that the universe is extremely vast and humans can't possibly mentally grasp everything out there, and anything is possible. However, I've never been very sensitive to anything like that. I've experienced spooky things, sure, but nothing too extreme for me to explain it away. Picture frames that have been hung for years dropping to the floor seemingly out of nowhere in my childhood home, hearing unexplained footsteps, etc. all things I could dismiss. I've also seen several UFOs on the same night. Let me know if you'd like to hear about that. But about a year ago, something happened that I've never been able to explain, and I can't get it out of my head. I am a female living in Arkansas and was staying in a rental house with my stepsister and her boyfriend. I was 21. It was 1 floor, 3 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms. The living room and dining room are at the front of the house, connecting to the kitchen, and then there is a short hallway going down to all 3 bedroom doors at the back of the house. It was about midnight, and my stepsister and her boyfriend both had work early in the morning and were asleep. I was still awake but was getting ready for bed. I also would like to note that I had not been drinking, smoking, or watching anything scary. I had been chilling in my room watching TV and was definitely not in a paranoid state of mind. I remember thinking my room was too warm for me to go to sleep. It was May, and Arkansas was already hot for the summer. I decided to turn my TV off and go turn the thermostat down a little bit. The thermostat is located in the little hallway, just a few feet from my bedroom door. When you step into the hallway from the bedrooms, you can clearly see into the living room. We had a sliding glass door where you could see into the backyard and a motion sensor light on the back porch. We would not only lock the sliding door but also have a pole wedged into it from the inside so it would not open unless you moved the pole. When I stepped into the hallway and made just a couple steps towards the thermostat, the motion light out back was on, and I could clearly see two people in the living room. They looked like they were facing each other on the couch or just crouching in front of the couch. They were backlit from the outdoor light, so I couldn't clearly see faces, just their outlines. At this point, my first thought was that my stepsister and her boyfriend were fooling around in the living room. It was completely dark apart from the outdoor light, with no TV on or anything, and for some reason I just thought they were in there chilling or something. Doesn't make much sense in retrospect, but that was my original thought. I immediately felt embarrassed and loudly said, "Oh shit, guys, I'm sorry." Then the two figures who were originally facing each other darted their heads towards me. It was very quick, almost as if I startled them. Thinking I had walked in on them and scared them, I quickly turned around and returned to my room, forgetting about the thermostat. I kind of was giggling to myself, still not feeling scared, just embarrassed, and I thought it was funny. I turned my light off and went to lie down in bed. As I lay there, I was expecting to hear them going back into their room, or laughing, or something. Some sort of reaction. But nothing came. The house was so silent now without my TV on. I lay there for about 5 minutes, then started to get worried. I decided to call my stepsister to confirm what just happened. I assume her phone was on silent because her room is right next to mine and I didn't hear a ring. When she didn't answer, I called her boyfriend. His phone rang, and he finally answered. It was clear that I had just woken him up because of how his sleepy voice sounded. I asked him if they were in the living room, and he said no, that they were both asleep, and he sounded annoyed that I was calling him at midnight, knowing he had to be up around 4. Still not even thinking about ghosts, I told him that I just saw two people in the living room, and I think people had broken in. He woke my sister up, told her what was going on, and they both grabbed something from the room to use as a weapon. All I had was a pocket knife, but I grabbed it, and we all decided to leave our rooms at the same time and step into the hallway. He walked ahead of us, and the three of us made our way into the living room, turning on lights as we walked. There was nothing. The pole was still wedged into the sliding door from the inside, and the deadbolt and lower lock on the front door were still locked, as well as all of the windows still being shut and locked. Nothing appeared out of place. They assumed I was high or had been drinking or something, or maybe just saw jackets hanging on the coat hooks. This experience still shakes me up to think about. I stand by there being absolutely no way I could have mistaken a jacket or a shadow for people, because when I spoke, the two figures had both quickly turned and faced me. The upper deadbolt on the front door could only be locked from the inside. There was no keyhole for it on the outside, and no way for someone to leave and lock it behind them. There is also no way someone could leave through the sliding glass door and replace the pole on the inside that kept it closed. I have never experienced something like this before or since. I am certain now that what I saw was otherworldly and not intruders. Nobody believes me, though. Strange paranormal experience? I'm wondering if something saved us from a bad accident. In the last 2 weeks, my brother came to visit us from Turkey. We had so much fun, but on August 20th, when we were taking him to the airport, our car key's battery drained so strangely in the middle of the highway. So we had to go back and find the other key. After we arrived home, none of us could find the key. We got hopeless, so we decided to send him to the airport with a taxi. As we were about to grab him a taxi, my mom said a prayer. She has a special prayer to find lost things, and it works all the time, and incredibly, we found it under the seat where nobody could have guessed it, just like something tried to save us from something. Later that day, after we took my brother to the airport, we quickly ran out of gas on our way back home. Unfortunately, the gas station lost power, forcing us to wait there for about 15 minutes. During that time, something strange happened. A truck driving on the highway suddenly had a tire blowout, creating a mess similar to the one we were experiencing while waiting for the gas station's power to return. I believe that if we had not run out of fuel, we would be deceased, literally dead. I would be happy to see your thoughts on this one. I was 17. My mom and I went on a trip to Miami and decided to stay at a very dated Holiday Inn. I'm talking 80s decor, dusty thick fabric curtains, and carpets that smelled like marinated cigarettes. My mom proposed we go shopping with my aunt, but I was in lots of pain due to my scoliosis, so I decided to stay in the hotel room. Then my aunt came to the room. I told her about my pain, and she gave me some old Tylenol. I took it, they left. I was lying in bed simply looking at the ceiling when I started feeling so very relaxed, almost sleepy. Then, the popcorn ceiling started to move like water. That's when I realized the Tylenol was probably expired. So I just accepted that I was basically tripping. My body was paralyzed, but I could look around and was aware of everything. I was awake. In that moment, my conclusion was that I was going through sleep paralysis, induced by the extreme relaxation I was experiencing. The next thing I see is a Charles Chaplin-looking guy sitting in the right corner of my bed, looking back at me in a calm manner. I was like, okay, this is a hallucination, nothing to worry about. I've had sleep paralysis hallucinations before. The guy was in front of a window, and it was dark outside. I made the mistake of focusing on the window because strange-looking things started to appear. I couldn't tell what I was looking at, and before I could focus further, I felt like I was falling back into the bed from a great height. I heard a very strong sound of my body clashing into the mattress, and I couldn't breathe. It felt like being close to drowning and then being suddenly rescued and trying to get as much air in as you can. So I worried, this was new for me. Falling into my own body. I decided to avoid paralysis again, but I was so tired. I was trying to contact my mom from lots of places, but no one answered. Until I heard some voices coming from the living room. The room had, like, a separate living room with the entrance and also a bathroom. I realized the voices were from my mom and my aunt, but they were unintelligible, like Charlie Brown's teachers. Then, my mom and my aunt appeared in my room, and I was so happy. I started explaining what was going on, but they didn't listen. I realized something was off, but before I could say anything, they started undressing me, taking off my pants. I couldn't do much except ask them to stop because I was paralyzed again. I was getting desperate when once again I fell from a great height into my body. It felt as if my soul had left my body and was violently trying to return, struggling for air. And I was fed up with this whole sleep paralysis hallucination situation. I came to the conclusion that I was actually doing this thing I saw on some old internet forum years before called, in Spanish, desdoblars, where you go out of your body and explore. I believe it's something like astral projection. I remember they were teaching people some techniques on how to do it by yourself. Get really tired, lie down, pretend you have a rope and you're pulling from it, etc. At this moment I was trying not to lie down anymore. The last encounter felt traumatic even. But it was futile. I felt so tired from the Tylenol that I couldn't resist lying down, but this time I actually saw myself from outside my body lying down in bed. It was such a weird experience, but there was nothing in the room, so I went out to the tiny living room area to see if I could find someone that I knew or could help me. What I saw the moment I stepped out of the room was crazy. In front of me sat another version of myself on the couch. Same clothes, same hair, same everything. No expression in the face. My doppelganger was looking at me, and another doppelganger was looking at her. And then another clone of me was looking at the one looking at the one looking at me. There were maybe 4 or 5 of me in that tiny living room. They all had blank expressions as they looked at one another. The last one of these apparitions was not looking at her clone but rather looking at herself in a mirror that was outside of the bathroom. So I walked towards her to see what she was looking at. Then I'm in front of the mirror looking at my reflection. All of a sudden my face starts to shift into a twirl, and another figure starts emerging from this chaos. It was the scariest shit I've seen in my life. I honestly would like to be able to describe what I saw, but I only remember the feeling of complete fear going through my body and especially my legs. Then, once again, I fall into my body. Violently. My mom and my aunt return from shopping just minutes after these events, and I attempt to explain to them how scared I was while trying to contact them in various places. They didn't care much for what I was telling them. Nothing else happened on that trip. We changed hotels, and the next days were normal. Yes. I visited a friend up in Down East Maine, who had another friend who was restoring an old farmhouse. They told me the house was legit haunted. I sort of believed them but was also still a little skeptical. We went to visit the friend in the evening, and we were all standing around the kitchen downstairs when we heard some thumps upstairs. The friend perked his head up and said, "The ghosts are here, want to meet them?" So he brought me to the big staircase leading upstairs, the kind with a landing halfway up before the stairs turn 90 degrees and continue up. We stood on the landing and waited. There was no one else in the house but us, no one upstairs and no one else downstairs, just us 3. I could hear footsteps and thumps coming from upstairs, but the weirdest thing that still gives me chills is the icy cold puffs of air that swirled around my head and neck. I didn't feel it anywhere else on my body, just around my neck and sides of my head. It felt like freezing cold and somehow wet streams of air flying by the sides of my head, and I could also hear a strange buzzing/humming sound whenever they made contact with my skin. It was the absolute eeriest thing I've ever felt in my life because it was so undeniably paranormal. That house is actually in a book about haunted Maine. I've read the chapter on it. I don't know why anyone would want to restore it and live in it. My sister still freaks out when we talk about this one. I'm almost 40, and this happened when I was 4 or 5 and she was 3 or 4. Any road. When we were growing up, we lived at my grandma's house, along with my mom, my aunt, my grandpa, and our family dog. My sister and I shared a room. Now, the room was the smallest room, and it was often considered the creepiest of rooms because it was very dark and got so little light despite the usual Southern California sun. Our bedroom door opened out into the main hallway, which connected everyone else's bedrooms to the house. This is important because, at night, the door to our bedroom was always open and the hall light was left on for me. I've always been afraid of the dark. The way our room was set up as well was with my sister's bed against one wall, the wall where our door was attached and with the only window. The head of her bed rested under the window, and the foot faced the door. My bed was on the opposite wall, with the head facing an external wall, and it sat aligned to the kitchen wall, with the foot facing the closet. On this particular night, after the ritual and routine of our bedtime bath, story, and nightly prayers, my sister and I continued to chat until she eventually dropped off. I have always struggled to sleep, so I was stuck in my bed waiting to drift off. I remember seeing my grandma go to bed, and I asked her to please leave the hall light on. Sometimes, she would shut it off if she thought I was asleep. Eventually, everyone was asleep, so I turned to face the wall and popped a blanket over my head, a habit that stemmed from my fear of the dark, and I finally fell asleep. Unfortunately, I was woken by the sound of my little sister screaming and crying. I woke up, panicked, because she was so scared and she was screaming my name over and over and over. I turned to look over at her, and there, right down the center of our shared room, is this massive, solid-looking red brick wall. I remember my heart just pounding, and I was afraid to even breathe or be too loud, but my sister was absolutely roaring and crying and just begging me to help. So, I climbed out of my bed, a sensation I felt was real, because I remember running my bare toes through the shag of this horrible decorative carpet, and I reached out and touched the wall. Solid. Cold. Brick. Except for this hand and arm that suddenly stretched through the wall. I could feel the texture, the grit and grooves, and I could hear my sister, her voice dampened by the brick but still clear as she was crying and screaming out my name. So, I called out to her, too. Sister. Listen. Go get mom or grandma. Get our aunt. I'm stuck, and I can't get to the door. She shouts back to me a moment later, I can't. There's a brick wall. The door and window are gone. I am terrified. We are both enclosed, and there's no one who is hearing us scream. We both are crying out as loudly as we can for help, but no one is coming. So, after a lot of crying, I say, I can't find a way to get out. Go back to your bed. Hide under the covers. Pray. And I turn and do the same. I buried myself beneath my pillow, blankets, and stuffed animals. I am tucked as close to the adjoining kitchen wall as I can get. I can hear my sister crying and crying. I'm crying. I finally pass out again, and I wake just as the sun is peeking through our curtains. The wall is gone. I sit up, nervous, tired, and shaking, and my sister turns. She sees me. She's been crying, her eyes are red and swollen. I couldn't get out. There was a brick wall. She says. I am sitting across from her, bundled and shaking. I couldn't get to you. I saw the brick wall, too. She comes and she sits beside me. Our bedroom door is open. Our family dog is on her bed sleeping. The hall light is still on. There are stirrings of an adult waking. My arm went through the brick wall. She says, I was trying to get to you. I saw your arm. I remember thinking, what in the world actually happened? We share our experience with my grandma, mom, aunt, and grandpa that morning. Everyone, except my aunt, says, oh, what a horrible nightmare. And plays it off, but my aunt says, I think there's something wrong with this house. There's always something weird happening here. I'm glad you two are okay. When I was in my 20s, my sister lived with my boyfriend and me. We sat around one evening talking about what we had experienced in life, and he had loads of these awesome haunting stories from when he grew up in the South. My sister and I hesitated but eventually told him this story. She had to stop partway through, it upset her so badly. I finished telling him the story, and he deadpan looked at us and said, holy shit. That is seriously beyond terrifying. He later asked me, when we were alone, if the story was real. I confirmed that it was. He said, I was really hoping you were making it up. The way your sister couldn't finish telling it scared me. I know she is reasonable and logical, so for her to react like that, that was how I knew it was real. That house had many creepy things happen. My aunt always said it was because there was a Chinese immigrant graveyard nearby, and that she believed it was the restless souls seeking revenge. She grew up in that house for her entire childhood, so she had stories, my mom had stories, and another aunt of mine had stories, too. There was a lot of hush-hushing from the adults when we were kids, because no one wanted to scare us, but there really was something bizarre and unexplainable about that space. That shared nightmare experience was one of a few personal experiences that I genuinely still can't explain. My mother used to insist on one side of the duvet being tucked under the mattress. One night I had a dream that someone, in the shape of a person but made of darkness, was standing at the bottom of my bed staring down at me. Dream me sensed their hands reaching a few more millimeters to touch my feet that were sticking out of the bottom of my duvet. I woke up already pulling my feet towards my body. As I lay there disoriented, I started shivering. It was then I realized my duvet wasn't on me. I switched on the light and found the duvet crumpled on the floor at the bottom of my bed. How I had managed to untuck it and remove it completely from the bed in what felt like a second since I last felt the duvet on me I couldn't understand. That was probably the weirdest thing I experienced in that bedroom, but I'd always felt something. My desk used to face the wall, but I had to sit at an angle so I could see the room because I always felt like something was behind me. Once something sounded like it hit the ground and made a thud. Both I and my mother, each in our own rooms, called out to one another asking if the other was okay. It turns out neither of us had dropped anything, and we couldn't find anything on the floor or knocked over. The curtains used to move when the window was shut, but I'd chalk that up to bad workmanship. My mother worked long hours, so often I was the last person to leave the house and the first person to arrive home. Once I came home to a single piece of smashed pottery in the middle of the carpet. I couldn't understand where, how, or what it had come from. I did have a decorative pottery piece on a shelf about 2 meters away, but nowhere on that thing was a piece missing. I checked it over repeatedly, convinced it must have come from there. A few weeks later I came home to that decorative pottery smashed to smithereens in the middle of the carpet, where the previous piece had been. How it got 2 meters from the shelf while other items hadn't moved I couldn't understand. I'm loath to write this because I don't believe in the supernatural, nor am I religious. However, there is one moment that bugs me to this day that, although I can almost rationally attribute it to trauma, I still can't 100% explain. My Nana had died, the woman, alongside my granddad, who effectively raised me from the time my young mother brought me home from the hospital. I was 6 years. I remember the funeral procession being a long drive from our house, where she'd lain in state for 3 days, to the Marae, a Maori culture center, about 80 kilometers away. My emotional state was pretty much every mixture of confusion/sadness/fear/anger, etc., that wouldn't be amiss in a young child who just lost the person in the world he loved the most. Anyway, I fall asleep in the car during the trip. I wake up at the Marae and get out of the car. A prayer service has already started, and I hear the most beautiful choral music I've ever heard. It's short, lasts about 15 seconds, and then just trails off. I remember looking around, seeing if it was people singing or a radio/stereo playing as part of the service. This is the early 70s, portable audio is nowhere near capable of that fidelity at that time. I searched for that source. Then I heard it one more time, briefly, for about 5 seconds, like it was moving away. Never heard it again. Like I said, a traumatic event does things to the mind. But I know what I heard. I can't explain it. But I know what I heard. Paranormal experience? Just to clarify, I'm not a person who believes in ghosts, demons, and other paranormal stuff. I told a couple of my friends what happened, and they know that I'm not the kind of person to make this up. When I asked them what that could be, they also didn't know what to say. I'm writing this because I want to hear an opinion from all of you guys and see if maybe someone has a rational explanation. So, nothing unusual happened that day. I stayed up late just watching some random videos. Around 3 a.m. I decided it was time to get some rest. I've put in my earplugs and laid down. I've used earplugs for a couple of years now because I wake up if I hear the smallest sound. I rolled around in my bed trying to fall asleep, but somehow I just couldn't do it. Also, normally I drift into sleep really fast. It doesn't take more than 5 minutes. I started feeling weird because around 40 minutes passed and I just couldn't sleep, although I was tired. Then I started to hear some noises. At first I thought it was a train passing by in the distance, but I soon realized that's not the case. I took my earplugs out, and I could hear a really loud sound. I don't know how to exactly describe it. Something like a strong wind, but I know for a fact it wasn't wind because when I got up and looked outside, all the trees were standing still. I thought that was weird but brushed it off, thinking it was nothing. When I was back in bed, ready to put my earplugs back in, I heard something else. This made my blood run cold. It's common here that the stairs that lead to the attic are outside of the house. We have stairs that are metal, and you can easily hear if someone is going up or down. So, as I was lying in bed, I heard footsteps going up the stairs. I just froze and couldn't believe what I was hearing. At first I thought someone wanted to break into our attic, but what's weird is I never heard someone trying to open the metal doors nor someone going back down. I was awake for another hour trying to process what happened. I know I wasn't sleeping because when I have bad dreams, I have the ability to wake up right away. I also know that if someone wanted to break in and if they realized it's locked, they would have to go back down. Also, this house was made around 1965 by my grandparents, and no one ever died here. I still think about that night sometimes, and I don't know what to think of it. Some other strange things happened, but they weren't as intense as this one. Please, let me know what you think about this. The experience that made me believe in the paranormal. What I am about to tell you happened 16 years ago, when I was 10. But I still remember everything crystal clear as if it just had happened. As I said, I was 10 and always had the feeling of being watched and followed in the dark. Well, it was a bit more specific, but I will talk about it again soon. I always calmed myself by telling myself it would be nothing. Every kid is scared of something silly like that, right? At least I thought. Even though I didn't like the dark, I wouldn't say I was scared. I rather proved myself wrong by facing whatever thought is making me uncomfortable. So again, when there was a dark area around me or if the lights were completely off, I often had very specific thoughts that tried to scare me. Like something is in there watching me reading my book or something just waits till it's dark to grab me and scratch my arm right here, like it was very specific what would happen in the dark, you know? When I was a kid, I loved documentary movies, so I knew about survival instincts and stuff. That's what I would advise myself to alleviate anxiety. It's natural to feel afraid of the dark because visibility is limited. There's nothing there to prove it to me. I would do exactly what my instincts told me not to do. Most likely nothing happened, as I told myself, but the next day I had scratched and blue marks on my body where my instincts told me they would be if it was dark. I ignored it. I think I just didn't want it to be anything. Since it would mean there really is something. That was just to explain the background a bit. Let's talk about the night that changed my life. As I went to bed, I again had this feeling. This really, really bad feeling. It was way stronger than ever before. Something told me to not switch the light off. To explain, I was already in bed. I just had to reach out to hit the light switch. But before I could turn it off, I froze and just couldn't do it. My thoughts weren't specific this time. I just had this huge fear of doing it, and it was just like, you'll regret it. It took me a few minutes to convince myself I was childish and just should do it. Eventually I turned it off. It was dark around me. Like really dark. I had those glow-in-the-dark stars on my wall, but I couldn't even see them. It was just pitch black. Again this huge fear overcame me, and I slept deeper under my blanket. Everything felt just off. That's when I heard it. A very creepy breathing right behind me in the room. I was facing the wall, eyes wide open. Again I froze. I was too scared to turn around or move myself. Geez, I was even too scared to breathe myself. I just hoped it wouldn't notice me. I can try to describe the breathing sound. It was almost as if it would growl in a very, very, very deep tone every time it breathed out. While breathing in, it sounded like it was kind of hissing at the same time. I can't tell how long I was just lying there, listening to the sound of its breathing. It felt like forever. But considering I didn't breathe the whole time, it can't be that long. Suddenly I heard the sound of something being moved through the air. How do I explain? Do you know the sound when you take your ruler and just move it in the air real quick? It almost sounds like the wind in the trees, but different? Maybe you know what I mean. After I heard that sound, something hit my face. Well, more like brushed over it. I had long hair back then, and I felt it being moved forward with the force of it. And then silence. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. I still couldn't move. Not because I was paralyzed or something. It was more like I didn't want to move because I didn't know if it still was there and if it would attack me if it found me. I think it was pretty aware of me being there the whole time, but back then I didn't know that. Everything would have been possible, you know? When my body forced me to breathe again, I was freaked out by the sound of my own breath at first. I thought it would be back. It took me a while to figure out it was just me and everything else was still silent. But I was still just lying there, listening. This time I can't tell how long it took me, but I didn't move until I noticed my stars on the wall glowing again. I reached out and turned the lights back on. I was shaking so bad. I remember how I couldn't hit the switch at first because I kept missing it because of this damn shaking. With the light back on, I realized, this really happened. Because there was the proof right in front of me. I had a teddy bear on my writing desk on the other side of the room. Now remember the sound of something moving in the air and how something slid over my face? Well, there he was. My teddy bear. lying between me and the wall. His eyes were facing directly towards mine. Something threw him at me. I am still living in the same house, and I am convinced whatever it was is still here. Over the years I figured there are several ghosts in this house, and most of them are friendly. But there also is the really evil entity. Well, I am not sure if it is just this one or even more. Most of the time it is in my old childhood bedroom, so I avoid going up there. My family and I tried to get rid of it several times, but every time there was something crushing our plans. And so it's still there. This is not at all the scariest thing I encountered, but it was the first one that made me realize that there are paranormal things, and I kind of grew up with them. I'd like to talk about the only paranormal experience I've ever had. So it was summer 2013. And I and my parents decided to take a weekend trip to one of the most famous, or infamous, locations of the Civil War. Gettysburg. Beautiful town, actually, with plenty of shops and historic locations all around. We spent most of our time driving around to battle sites, and it was actually quite rad knowing I was standing exactly where a soldier or general once did. But my paranormal experience occurred at a house of all places. Specifically, a place called the Sweeney House. I don't know exactly what went on in that house, but I know that if you go there, you'll still see bullet holes on the outside wall from the gunfire it took from the Confederates. I and my family and a tour group went in and explored the downstairs area. Really beautiful. But I eventually made my way to the kitchen area and saw a man in a Union blue uniform with a rifle slung over his right shoulder staring out of a window looking at the street. He didn't look angry, just like he was watching for something. I instantly thought it was just one of the reenactors for the battles they perform at. I just stood there staring at him for probably about 10 seconds. Eventually, he took off left towards the living room, which is next to the front door, I guess, to leave. I started to follow him just as he rounded the corner. But by the time I caught up to him, he was gone. And there was no way he would have been able to open the front door and then close it behind him that quickly. A real head scratcher for me. So, that's my story. I know it sounds like bullcrap. And I myself am even skeptical of spirits and ghosts that roam the earth, as weird as it sounds. But this is something that will stay with me for the rest of my days. Something was lying in bed with me at my family's cabin in the woods. I'm taking you to my family's cabin in Lake Tahoe, California. It's early summer in 2002 when I go on a long weekend trip with my aunt, uncle, 2 cousins, and the foreign exchange student that was staying with them at the time. The Tahoe House, as we called it, is owned by my godparents and has been enjoyed for years by anyone in our family circle looking to escape the city for a weekend getaway. It was tradition, or habit, that we'd always start off the day at a little greasy spoon that was called Chris's Cafe at the time, but I believe it's now called the Getaway Cafe on Highway 89 in Meyer, California, just south of South Lake Tahoe. Excellent mountain breakfasts and unlimited coffee to get you ready for whatever outdoor adventure you were seeking. On that day, we wanted to go on one of our favorite hikes in the area. I'm not sure of the name, but it's a trail from Emerald Bay to Eagle Lake, a beautiful 3-mile out and back hike that I've done countless times. We were all excited to show the foreign exchange member of our family the crystal clear waters of not only Lake Tahoe but also all of the alpine lakes in the area, our favorite being along this hike. After a few hours of hiking and enjoying the lake, we were all ready to head back to the cabin and get a bite to eat. My uncle, always down for an adventure, wanted to give our new friend an exciting memory, so we went off trail and followed the river back to our cars. It was a fun, yet rugged hike, with a few scary parts where tree roots saved us from falling into the river below. At the time, I was a smoker, and by the time we reached our cabin around 2 p.m., I was exhausted and wanted to take a quick nap before our evening of board games by the fire. The cabin has 3 bedrooms and a loft. The room I usually stayed in was known as the Budweiser room because at one point, the room was adorned with Budweiser-themed bedding and curtains. I don't know the origins of the Budweiser sheets and curtains, but I have a feeling the 70s had something to do with it. Nonetheless, it was my favorite room because it always stayed cool, unlike the rest of the cabin that lacked air conditioning. It was a simple room with a side table, a small closet, and an old squeaky queen-size bed with a nice body-sized dent in the middle perfect for snuggling into. When I was ready for a nap, I flopped down face first into said dent without bothering to get under the covers. Normally, it takes me some time to wind down and fall asleep, even when tired, so I was busy replaying the day in my head when I felt something brush across my feet and move to the left side of the bed. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was one of the 2 large dogs in the house since they often followed me around because I buy their love with endless treats. About 30 seconds later, I felt the weight of something lean onto the bed starting at my feet, slowly moving up towards the pillows and eventually settling down next to me, but not touching me. Although I couldn't feel it, there was definitely something there. I dismissed it as my cousin Janelle, who was around 12 at the time. We never took naps together, but I guess we've fallen asleep on the couch together from time to time while watching movies. Since we were close and my cousins felt more like siblings, it didn't seem strange at the time that she'd take a nap next to me. While I lay there, still trying to relax, I felt what I thought was Janelle move to the foot of the bed again, brushing across my feet to the right, and slide onto the right side of the bed right next to me. It was strange, but I assumed she wanted to sleep on the other side of me. I didn't think about it too much and didn't want to open my eyes for verification because I didn't want to risk waking up and not being able to nap. Again, after a few minutes had passed, I felt the weight in the bed shift again, move down to the foot of the bed, and lighten up as if Janelle just got bored and decided a nap wasn't in her future. A few more minutes passed, and I was definitely drifting off to sleep and was abruptly awakened by the sensation of two hands lightly gripping my ankles. Thinking Janelle was playing a prank on me, I decided to scare her before she could scare me. I counted to 3 in my head and jumped out of bed with a roar, intending to give her a scare. To my surprise, there was no one in the room. I quickly jumped out of bed and checked under it, in the closet, and even pulled back the curtains in a desperate attempt to explain what had just happened. The door to the room was closed, and when I opened it, I found my cousins, aunt, uncle, and the exchange student enjoying themselves by the fire. They were nowhere near my room. I closed the door, sat on the foot of the bed, and tried to process what had occurred in the past half hour or so. At dinner that night, I shared the story with everyone, and it turns out I'm not the first person to have a strange experience in that room. Apparently, everyone feels a little spooked by it, which explains why there is never any opposition to me staying in that room. It's peculiar because, to our knowledge, the cabin wasn't built on a burial site or associated with any deaths. Since my family enjoys buying antiques and pillaging estate sales, we figure that one of the antiques must have had something attached to it, which now resides in that cabin and makes its home in the Budweiser room. I still stay in that room, hoping for another encounter, but I haven't been fortunate enough to experience anything since that first incident. Thankfully, it seems like it's only a lonely spirit, always seeking to get close to the room's occupants. Now this isn't the first time I've had something happen to me while lying in bed ready for sleep. Often in high school, I'd feel my bed shake during this twilight time between being awake and sleeping. It'd wake me up completely, and it'd still be shaking when I'd sit up in bed, only to stop once I was out of the bed. Very strange. I'd also hear my name whispered in my ear while drifting off to sleep, so often I'd kind of dread going to sleep at night when I was a kid. I was chased out of an abandoned building by someone or something. A few years back, maybe around 2018 in northern Canada, I used to like to explore abandoned buildings with some of my friends. We never did anything malicious or took anything, we just liked looking around and taking pictures. We had done this dozens of times, and even though it was often at night, we were rarely spooked by anything. Fast forward to us deciding to explore an old abandoned military residence. It was mostly just apartment rooms, but there were also some recreational areas like an indoor basketball court. While we were looking around this court, we decided to look in the changing rooms/bathrooms. Anyway, we went in the women's one first, and there was nothing out of the ordinary aside from one of the mirrors being broken. After this we decided we might as well check out the men's room as well. As we began to approach the door to the men's room, it was at this moment when I got that gut feeling that was telling me something was wrong. I hadn't felt even the slightest bit of concern up until this point, and now I was extremely on edge. I really didn't want to seem scared and spook the others, so I decided to ignore it for now. When I opened the door, I was immediately hit by a foul smell, as you sometimes come across in these places, but something I wasn't expecting was the extreme humidity in the room, almost as if someone had just taken a shower. There were no showers in the women's room, and not even any running water from what I could tell. As we got to the center of the room, it was at this moment the feeling that something was wrong started becoming overwhelming, so I turned to my friends and said with a slight voice crack, "Did you want to just go?" I could tell in this moment they were feeling the same feeling as me based on the looks on their faces. At the exact moment I finished saying that, an extremely large figure burst out from one of the stalls and started running towards us. I'm fairly tall, standing at about 6 feet 4 inches, but this thing was much taller than me. This figure was covered basically head to toe in black garbage bags to the point where I'm not even sure how they were able to see, let alone run. It didn't seem to run as you'd expect a person running on 2 legs would look, it just kind of moved sporadically. We began sprinting out of the room, trying not to slip on the tile floor due to the water from all the humidity. Thankfully, once outside the room, it was just a straight shot across the basketball court to the other side, where there was an exit door. The entire time we were running, I could hear this figure giving chase right behind us, as all the garbage bags they were wearing were making so much noise. Once outside, we immediately ran to our car and floored it out of there. Not many words were spoken on the drive home, as I think we were having trouble coming to terms with what exactly we had just experienced. As crazy as this may sound, I was so bothered by what happened that I wanted to return to the building in hopes of maybe getting some closure for myself. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there was now always one or two civilian cars parked near the building with security inside threatening us with arrest if we got any closer. We visited a few more times to see if we could find a time without the security, but they remained there until the building was ultimately demolished around 2 months after the event. My father intervened and saved my life from the other side. What follows occurred in 2005, when I was going through a very messy and painful, for me anyway, divorce. In looking back, I remember fighting so hard, for so long, to keep together a situation that was a lost cause for years. I set the stage this way to help you, the reader, understand that, for months as this dragged on, I was not in a good place at all. And so it was on a certain night, after another day of too many cigarettes and far too much dark anguish, that I lay there waiting to go to sleep. Sleep was difficult during this time for me, but at some point I did fall asleep, and at some point the following experience happened. I found myself standing in about a foot of fresh snow, which at the time I thought was really interesting since it was summer in the waking world. The dream was lucid, which is not rare for me, in that I remember looking behind me, and there were no footsteps in the snow. I did not walk here. It was night, and based on the enormous tree lines surrounding me that I could make out in the moonlight, I was in the middle of some vast forest. In front of me was a small cabin, lit from the inside, with smoke trailing from the chimney. At that moment, I began to feel the cold, prompting me to walk up to the cabin. I knocked on the door and was shocked when my father answered. He had died in 2000, and we were extremely close. I couldn't believe it. For a few minutes, there were hugs and tears, and suddenly I found myself with all these pictures of my daughters in my pockets. So I was taking them out and showing them to him, telling him stories. He was patiently smiling, but I could tell that he was listening for my benefit, and it soon set in that he had seen every one of these moments of me and my kids. He has seen everything, and I still believe to this day that he watches over my girls and his new great-granddaughter. Something struck me as odd, though, once I began to take this all in. My dad was not the rustic type. In fact, he hated camping, etc. As I looked around, I noticed that the place was filled with books and other items that made it comfortable, but it didn't truly feel like a space he belonged in, if you catch my drift. I must have mentioned that because I watched his face change into something a bit more somber, and he answered. It's because I don't really belong here, I'm supposed to be somewhere else. I didn't understand what he meant, and he must have read it on my face. He went on. I'm here for you, son. I came here, to this place, to help you, but we are running out of time. You're here because I have something to show you. In the next instant, we were back in the snow, behind the cabin. The moon was really bright, I remember, because I could see pretty clearly. We were standing in front of this gigantic kennel, with a high fence all around it. I was confused. At that moment, I noticed two large shadows moving in the back. I began to hear the sounds they were making, and I will never forget it. It was like a growl and a whine at the same time. I think they sensed who I was or something, because they shot forward into the light, and I saw them for the first time. They were two huge, black wolves, but so horrible looking. They were so enraged and, at the same time, so sick. Their hair was matted in filth and gone altogether in sickly patches, with bloody spots where they had bitten themselves or each other. They were throwing themselves at the fence, almost blindly, to get at me. I remember they were biting at the fence until their mouths were bloody. Once or twice they bumped into each other, and then they would immediately tangle in a bloody, violent fight. Dark blood fell on the snow. Somehow I knew that the battle must have been going on for a very long time. The whole scene was so frightening, so repulsive, and so confusing. Again, this sort of thing was so out of character for my dad, who loved animals. I asked him, why was he doing this? Why are you keeping these things around? I remember my dad's face, so kind but painful too. I could see it. He said, son, don't you understand? This is what I am here for, in the middle of nowhere, hidden away out here. I am here to help you. He motioned to the kennel. These two wolves represent your anger and fear, and they are causing chaos in your life. I came here to keep them here, to keep you safe. But son, I can't hold them here any longer. You can't hold them here any longer. They will destroy everything. You aren't going to live much longer like this. I stood there in the silence, even the wolves had fallen silent, and I wanted to cry. All of it came into view, the beating myself up, the huge toll it was taking on me, my mental and physical health, all coming up to the point where I was actually facing my death. I knew that part to be true, I would be dead within days. All of it was because someone didn't love me, but what was actually doing the most damage, what was killing me, was that I refused to love myself. I could tell by my dad's face that he saw me coming to this realization, and he smiled in relief. "Are you ready?" he asked. I was terrified they would attack me, but I knew there was no choice. With the whole world watching, it felt like I walked up with as much courage as I had and flung open the gate. With that growling whine that was deafening, the wolves leapt out of the kennel, finally free. They stood there for a moment, locking eyes with me, their hair standing on end. For a second I thought they were going to end me, payment for keeping them in a cage. And finally, without a look back, they charged together into the forest. Where they went, I do not know. I remember looking at my dad, not knowing what to do next. There were no more words, just a feeling that the experience was over. I knew I'd never return, but my father would, and that was enough. And it was then I woke up. It was early morning, I felt mentally and physically drained, somehow not the same. But there was also a knowing that the worst was behind me, that I was not going to die, yet. The wolves were released. Day by day, I slept better. As the moving day approached, I found myself looking forward to a new life. My daughters and I shared the most wonderful adventures during our time together, creating cherished memories that we continue to discuss to this day. I owe much of that turning point to my dad, who put himself in a cabin in the middle of nowhere to keep me from tearing myself apart. The paranormal experience that convinced me. Maybe there is a reasonable explanation, but this one definitely shook me, and not in a bad way. In the early 2000s I was dating a man and became pregnant after only a few months. During this time, throughout my pregnancy, his mom was suffering from terminal cancer. She was dying. I wasn't working at the time, so I ended up spending a lot of time with her as a companion. I also managed her meds and took her to appointments. We spent a lot of time together while she was succumbing to cancer. I ended up giving birth 2 weeks before she died, and she was able to meet the baby, which I was so grateful for. She and I had really bonded before her death. Her son and I did not end up working out. We were young at the time. When the baby was 6 weeks old, we split, and he moved out of state. The baby did not have a relationship with him or anyone on his side of the family. A few months after she passed, I had the most vivid dream I've ever had in my life, where she came to me, dressed in a beautiful green ball gown for some reason, embraced me, and thanked me for everything. In the dream she was much younger, in her late 30s, she died in her 70s. I can't even express how vivid this dream was. I have never before or since had an experience like that. I always kept an old photo of her that her son left at my house. She was young in this photo, late 30s, that sat in a frame hanging on my wall in my bedroom kind of out of the way. I didn't think about the photo really at all. Life went on. Here was the paranormal part. When my baby was a toddler, one day he was with me in my room while I was rearranging things. I was taking down posters and frames from my wall, setting them down on the bed. As I'm walking around, I hear my son say, "Green Grandma." I was like, what? He had the photo in his hands, a big smile on his face, and again said, "It's Green Grandma." I immediately flashed back to the dream I had after she died, in that beautiful green ball gown. There is no reason I can think of he would say that when looking at this photo. He had no experience with any of that side of his family, and I had never talked to him about her. He was just a baby. I am usually a skeptic, but this experience was the one in my life that truly made me question what I understand as reality. Honestly, I'm not sure what coincidence could have led to this at all. This happened a couple of months ago. I was on the ground floor of my apartment building, and I was getting into the elevator alone to go up to my room. Before the doors closed, I saw somebody walking close, but he headed towards the stairs that are directly opposite the elevators. I pressed the button for my floor and waited for it to open. When it did, I immediately walked straight out, only to realize that it wasn't my floor. The weird thing is that it wasn't any floor I recognized. Because it's a student accommodation, all the floors have the same layout. Opposite the elevator are the stairs and a sign saying what floor it is, for example, second floor. To the left is a tall window, and to the right is a small corridor that connects, like a T intersection, to a bigger hallway that is all the rooms. This floor had a wall with a window on the right side, where the adjoining corridor to the rooms would normally be. There was still a window on the left, one door opposite the elevator, and a sign with what looked like a G. I was standing there trying to figure out how this happened and where I was when the guy I saw earlier literally burst through the door of the stairway, looking at me with a confused expression before turning back to the stairs. I stepped back to the elevator and pressed the button for my floor again, and when it opened, I was in the correct location. It was only after I entered my room that I really got freaked out, because there is no possible floor that I could have gone to. I distinctly remember the elevator going up both when it took me to the weird floor and to my studio on the 5th floor, so that rules out a basement, roof, and possible 6th or 9th floor that I could have remembered wrong as G. It doesn't make sense for there to be a random floor that leads to nowhere. I think there might have been a second door opposite the elevator, but I am not certain about that detail. Still, I told my friend who lived in the same building, and he didn't have any answers. Therefore, I have no explanation for the realm that my friend and I apparently entered. I have had countless experiences with the paranormal. I usually avoid discussing them because doing so triggers more encounters and experiences. However, since I am sick and stuck at home, I feel compelled to share my experiences. My mom always said when I was young I would tell her friends things that turned out to be true. The most memorable one happened when I was about 3. While my mom's friend was occupied, I approached her, gently touched her face, and advised her against eating cheese. She wasn't consuming any cheese at the time. My sudden suggestion was unexpected. I guess before she came over she had eaten some, so she was very weirded out. The next day she comes over after an ER trip. Her entire face is swollen, and it turns out she had developed a severe allergy to cheese. That friend often tried to persuade me to share more information, but I would always respond that it doesn't work that way. Fast forward to being about 5. I was taken away from my mom at this point in my life because she uses methamphetamines. I lived with my paternal grandparents. I often slept with my grandma at this age. When I woke up this particular morning, I was not in my body. I was watching myself sleep next to my grandma on my bed. I was above us, tucked in the corner of my room. I floated into the living room, looked out the window, and saw someone I didn't recognize. A woman with a beaker dumped a substance onto my lawn and then left in a panic. At that moment, I saw black smoke rising from the liquid that had just been poured out. I felt a sense of overwhelming fear. I knew I had to wake myself up. I didn't know how to. I was looking right at my face and couldn't wake myself. I felt that fear again while I was attempting to wake myself up. And then I saw it. A hooded figure dressed in black. I could see it had flames for eyes. My floating self tucked itself back into the corner in the ceiling. It didn't notice the floating me, only the sleeping me. It grabbed something from under its cloak, something that, whatever it was, stabbed me with. I was screaming from my bed and the ceiling. I could feel it deep under between my ribs. I was inconsolable for hours. And when I was finally able to talk and explain everything, I had a giant bruise where I had been stabbed. Not even a week later my mom, who was a very heavy user at this point, came to my grandparents' house, and she was in hysterics. My grandma was holding me back, and my papa was holding my mom back. She kept screaming, "They're coming for you. The demons are coming," she exclaimed repeatedly. And I swear when something awful is happening or something is off, that same spot still aches. I have a ton more stories, so here is another. At this point I'm 8. I've grown used to hearing things and not telling anyone. For a long time there were 2 apparitions who would watch me sleep. They would whisper to each other, "Is she asleep?" And the other would respond, "Not yet." I would lie awake at night drenched in sweat with my eyes closed, lying as still as possible. When I was 8, my papa had died. I was absolutely heartbroken. I didn't talk to anyone for 3 months. I had nothing to say. Then my bio father, who I didn't even know, was released from prison and came to live with my grandma, his mom, and me. He was beyond cruel to me. We have spoken in 10 to 11 years. But I was about 8.5 or so when we purchased the house next door to the one my papa passed away in. I don't think my grandma could stand to be there. Well, we had managed to clear out that house completely, and were getting it ready for tenants to move in. We kept it locked at all times. One day my dad and I were cleaning up the yard at the new house when we heard the sound of our original house's side gate opening. It had a distinct scraping sound it would make against the concrete. My dad and I looked up at each other. Then we heard the side garage door open and slam. We knew for a fact that the door was locked. Finally, the door leading into the kitchen opened and closed. We ran into the house. All the doors we knew were locked were now unlocked. The house was empty. No furniture. Nothing. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. My dad called out for his dad, and this feeling of sadness came over me. My papa was there, but we weren't. I didn't know what to do. I felt my heart break all over that day. My dad told me the day he sees things. He described some of the scariest things I've ever heard. I would rather not talk to him about it. Just thinking about the pictures he used to have of the things he would see gives me a sinking feeling. The one picture that I wish I still had was so scary I swear I almost threw up. When I was 13, I would visit my dad and grandma in the new house. At this point I moved in with my mom. My dad mentioned that he had invited a girl into the house. That's all he told me. We would put the dogs in the laundry room at night for bed. For some reason, after we put the dogs away, I decided I would take some digital photos. I read or heard somewhere that the flash can capture things that are normally invisible to us. I took pictures of the kitchen, living room, and also the laundry room, where the dogs were. There was the back of a girl. The girl with the long braid was walking towards the laundry room. I stared at the photos in disbelief. Then the dogs started growling. I ran to my dad, and he then showed me the picture. He snapped a photo of his girlfriend brandishing one of his stupid pistols. But in the background, the TV was visible. And there was the same girl, but this time it was her face. Black eyes, gray skin. And you could see her fingertips on the edge of the TV. It reminded me of The Ring. I got mad. I said that it was a picture of the TV. But if you've ever taken a picture of the TV, you'd see those lines, but there weren't any. Later that week we lost that camera. And the girl started to turn things on and off. The radio. The lights. It got so bad I once screamed at her to stop. And it did. But I don't know who that girl was or how he got her there, like he claimed he did. But it was terrifying. I don't trust my biological father at all. He is a violent man, and I'm afraid that she may have been hurt by him in some way. I swear schools are haunted, my experiences. I'm thoroughly convinced schools/college campuses are haunted, and I'm truly fascinated by who/what spirits are lurking in the hallways. Why? Why is their soul entrapped in an educational building? Who were they that they decided to attach themselves to this institution? Here are two incidents that happened to me at the same location. I keep thinking about them, so I thought I'd share. I'm from a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone's cousin. We don't have a lot of dark history in our town, but that doesn't stop the eerie experiences that can occur. Back in 2009, my senior year of high school, the school was holding an assembly in the morning for the graduating class. I and my friend just happened to be in a junior class study hall when the assembly was taking place. She and I asked the teacher if we could just leave early and head to the auditorium. The teacher agreed, and my friend and I went to the main office, asked if we could sit in the auditorium, and waited for the rest of our class. The secretary at the front desk gave us permission and told us to just be quiet. My friend and I picked some seats on the far end of the auditorium, propped up our feet, and listened to some music on her MP3 player while we waited for our class to arrive and the assembly to start. A few songs later, I developed an unsettling feeling. All of a sudden I felt uncomfortable, just me and her in the dim-lit auditorium. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. My friend seemed lost in the music, so I didn't bring it up. Moments later a shadow ran down the aisle, full sprint, and disappeared running straight into the stage. I froze, and I felt my friend tense up. I looked towards the doorway, curious if any shining light could cast a shadow. However, this was no ordinary shadow. It was not up against the wall or cast at an angle. It was completely dimensional and looked like a male child about 10 to 12 years of age. Despite that, I clearly wanted to find a logical explanation, but there was none. My friend was quiet. I said nothing. Even though it was seconds, it felt like forever. I turned to my friend and asked, "Did you see that?" She replied, "You mean that shadow?" I nodded, and she said, "Yes." We quickly got up and left the auditorium and went to the bathroom. While in the lavatory, we discussed that was 100% a shadow and not a reflection. We hung out in the bathroom until we heard the senior class come down for the assembly. My friend and I never discussed it again, nor did we ever mention it to anyone. I never forgot that instance, and years later another occurrence in the high school's auditorium completely solidified that it's haunted. Flash forward to 2014, and I'm fresh out of college and just recently hired at the high school I attended more than 4 years ago. It was summertime, so the schools were vacant. This sometimes gives them an eerie feeling, especially if you are alone and the lighting is down low. You might think you were in a prison or abandoned hospital ward if you did not know you were in a school. The summertime brings many deliveries that teachers and staff need for the school year to start, and, out of convenience, we store all shipments in the auditorium. I was alone in the auditorium and sorting through all the deliveries, separating them to be brought to different locations and classrooms. I then heard voices. A female and male were having a conversation, but it was just muffled enough that I could not hear their words, just the sound of their voices. I turned and quickly scanned the auditorium to see if anyone was in there with me. No one. Curious, I made my way down the auditorium to the back of the stage to see if maybe a custodian and the secretary were back there discussing something. The voices were still talking, and they neither faded nor got louder the closer I approached the stage. I made my way through a small corridor and checked behind the curtain. No one. I still heard the voices but had trouble pinpointing exactly where they were coming from. I made my way back out to the seating area and over to the back of the auditorium where the control panel, sound equipment, and computer are, thinking maybe something accidentally switched on. I checked all the appliances and equipment, and everything was off and not emitting any type of sound or noise. What the heck? I wondered. It was then that I got an uneasy feeling, the same sensation I felt years before when I was a senior and I and my friend were hanging out in the auditorium. I went to go leave the auditorium. Before leaving I turned back to listen, and the voices were still carrying on some type of conversation. Annoyed, I left and went to the main office. I asked the secretary if anyone was in the auditorium or if the custodians were expecting anyone. Summertime also comes with a lot of maintenance and facility work, so I was curious if a company was there looking at something. The secretary, to her knowledge, did not know of anyone scheduled to visit the building, but she paged the head custodian to come down and ask. While we were waiting for the head custodian, the secretary asked what was going on. I said, "There are people talking in the auditorium." She gave me a quizzical, but knowing, look. The custodian came into the main office and confirmed that no crews were scheduled to come to the school that day. The secretary looked at me, smiled, and said, "Tell him." I told him that I heard two people talking in the auditorium. He rubbed his beard and smirked, "Yep. I've had similar experiences too. Some of the other guys too." "No way," I exclaimed. He said, "Oh yeah. Pretty sure it's haunted." He whipped out his cell phone and texted some of his coworkers to come down to the main office. A couple more custodians showed up in the main office, and we started discussing our experiences in the auditorium and swapping more ghost/haunting stories. And the principal makes fun of me when I say I don't want to go to the auditorium by myself because I find it creepy in there. The secretary shouted. We laughed and tried to figure out who would be haunting the high school auditorium. We couldn't think of anything significant that happened in town. One of the custodians mentioned that he believes the other schools are haunted too. Needless to say, any time I was in the auditorium, especially alone, I would bring a flashlight and my phone and prop the door open. We had a ghost in our house while growing up. The house was built in 1917 and creaked like all old houses, but when doors opened and closed regularly and footsteps walked through the house, we knew something was going on. Sometimes we'd be on the toilet or taking a bath, didn't have a shower, and the damn door would open just enough to change the air in the bathroom. Checking the bathroom door, whether you were in there or walking down the hall, was just part of being upstairs. We really watched for that when we had guests over. No matter how much we'd say the ghost was cool, some folks are too religious to hear that. As I and my brother got older, we would stay the night somewhere else, and the ghost would open and close doors all night looking for us. It was really annoying. One night the front door slammed so hard the entire house shook. Occasionally when in bed you would feel someone sit on the edge, but the worst part of that was when it would lie down next to you. I didn't move whenever it happened. Since I was a teenager, I figured ghosts are nothing but people without bodies. They don't experience stress or hot/cold and are probably stuck in the area they knew. I don't believe in demons, but I believe there are angry ghosts that were either hurt badly or experienced something traumatic and take it out on whichever alive person is close by. I got followed by a demon. True story. So, there is something I'd like to share with everyone. I know it's going to sound like a fictional, made-up story, but believe me, it's not. The world is just a strange place, and my life has always been on the stranger part of the normalcy spectrum. I've always been able to see shadow people. For the most part, they're there in my peripheral vision, but sometimes they're right before me, in sharp relief. I know it sounds odd, but it's true. They've never harmed me, never attempted to touch me, but they're just there. I think they're mostly benign. But there are other things, not so inclined towards goodness. These are the demons that sometimes follow me. Again, I don't expect you to believe me, but this is the first time I'm talking about all of this to anyone besides my immediate family and closest friends, so please bear with me. I've had some pretty scary experiences with the latter. The one that always jumps out to me is from 8 years ago. For context, at the time I was a radio producer at a web radio in Greece, where I live and am from, and my program was from 8 to 10 p.m. every Saturday, playing rock and metal music. That night, I had finished my program as usual and was walking home. It was sometime in winter, either late December or early January, because there were still Christmas decorations out. The street on which I lived was parallel to the boulevard, but at that time of night, and with it being so cold outside, it was really nice and quiet for once. So, there I was, enjoying the night air and the lovely stillness, when I heard steps behind me. I stopped and looked behind me, but there was no one there. I shrugged and kept walking, thinking it was probably my overactive imagination. That was until the steps started again. I resolved to just keep the same pace, besides, I was only about 50 meters from my house. After all, it could just be someone who got out of their house, even though I'd heard no door opening or closing. I was determined to rationalize it and keep calm. And then, the sound of the steps changed. And it sounded like hooves. Two-legged hooves, at that. That's when I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was a demon. My heart rate went right up, and my hands started sweating. I ran the last 20 meters to the entrance of the apartment building, and only after closing the door behind me did I dare to slow down and breathe normally. Nothing came by on the street. It was gone. Whatever that demon was, I'm glad I never looked back. It was there just to scare me, I knew it. That's what they like to do to me, scare me shitless. And they play a good game of chase or hide and seek, sometimes. I know it sounds like too much, but I wanted to ask, has anyone ever had any similar experiences? What's your story? I remember when I was little, I once saw two big yellow eyes in the mirror in front of my bed at night. I was 10 years old, I think, maybe less. I remember calling my parents, and after they came to see, the eyes never returned, but I asked my father to remove the mirror after a few days. Another time when I was 16, I saw my dead grandfather watching me sleep and my dog barking at him. He didn't seem scared. He was really tall, with blue jeans and a Scottish shirt, white hair and a beard, but no face. I have never met him since he died when I was 1 year old. It scared me a lot because I didn't have time to realize that there was someone, and he had already left. My mom showed me one of his shirts with a red and green Scottish pattern, and in that moment I understood that it was him. Another time, when I was 12 years old, I heard my mother calling me just after I had returned home, even though she was actually at my uncle's house. I waited to answer for a few minutes, and when I went to look for her, she wasn't there. She arrived at home after 2 hours. Used to work for some historical houses doing tours. It's 6 p.m., middle of winter. We got to this room I'd always hated. The guy who lived in the room took his own life, but the circumstances were weird. He was not a good man. The next relative to live in the room died as a child. They were both called Robert. Everyone said the Robert room was haunted. The Robert room was directly across from the only servant's room in the house. We called her Tweenie because she'd have been a really young girl. Tweenie lived up a flight of stairs in a tower that the owners had built for defense purposes. Her room didn't have a lock because the master of the house reportedly liked to stand in the tower room every morning and watch the ocean. Connect the dots on what we thought was happening there. Tweenie's door was always falling open too because of the lack of a lock. So I'm in the Robert room, and this lady is yammering on when a loud banging starts in the tower room. Lady asks me if it's haunted. I say I don't talk about ghosts in the house. She starts calling the spirits, and suddenly the door to Tweenie's stairs starts banging, the doorknob rattling. We're the only two in the house. I'm so uncomfortable because Tweenie's door is always falling open on windy days, but it's staying shut but banging like someone's on the other side and can't get out. Finished the tour right then. Never did another night tour. I don't necessarily believe in ghosts, but I'm glow-in-the-dark pale, so I'm never going to do dumb white person horror movie shit like invoking the spirits, Jesus. Tall pitch black figure with red glowing eyes in doorway. I have wanted to share my story for several years and finally have decided to share my experience. I'm 49. What I experienced was at the young age of 10 years old. An experience that still has been unanswered and still is a big question mark in my life. I was 10 years old and spent the night at a friend's house. It was a split-level home. The front door was in the middle of the house, which on entry led you to either walk up the stairs to the upper floor or down the stairs to the bottom floor. The bedrooms were on the upper floor. At the top of the stairs, the living room was to the left along with the dining room, the kitchen was straight ahead, and all the bedrooms were to the right down the hallway. My friend's room was at the end of the hallway to the right. His sister's bedroom is directly next to his, and his parents' is directly across the hallway. I've set the stage for the location, so here's a very brief backstory on me and my friend. Brief backstory on me. I've always been a highly empathetic, intuitive, and spiritual person. I was raised in a Christian household. Generations were church starters, pastors, and youth pastors. No, we aren't the righteous gemstones, but truthfully, after watching that show from start to finish, we come close. I was also considered a bit of a black sheep in the family. Meaning everyone at an older age was involved with church. My brother became a pastor. I, on the other hand, went into business and have always been outside the church. Yet, I still believe in God and have my faith, it just doesn't look like the rest of the family. I've always been very in tune with the spiritual world. I always have said the end of the movie Unbreakable really shook me up because I'm very much like that. As he walks through the crowd and they are bumping into him, he can feel and see what they are feeling and almost becomes them. Soaks it up. Backstory on my friend and his family. My friend and his family were somewhat the same but a lot more loose in their beliefs. The mom and dad were always yelling at each other. You could tell my friend was deeply affected by it with his actions and way about him. Didn't really like his family and not really sure why I liked him. I think it was someone I could be buddies with, and it stuck for a while. My friend asked me to spend the night. First time. Nothing unusual while we hung out all day. Even into the evening, nothing unusual. Around 9 p.m. we hung out in his room, and I remember listening to Brass Monkey by the Beastie Boys. Lights low and just chilling. We ended up going to bed around 10 p.m., mainly because his dad threatened us to go to sleep and keep quiet. His dad was a bit of a mafia type. Didn't want to mess with him. His bedroom was rectangular. You walked in the bedroom door, and everything was to the right. The door was butting up against the wall into the room. You could only turn right into the room or walk straight ahead. No left. His bed was up against the far left corner. His bed was elevated with drawers beneath it. I slept on the floor next to the bed in a sleeping bag. I couldn't see him on the bed since he was elevated while lying on the floor. We talked for a little bit until we turned off the lights and went to sleep. I still don't know exactly what time it was, but I remember waking up and sitting straight up in my sleeping bag. As I sat there, I remember wiping my eyes and noticing the entire room was a bit of a red/amber color. As if there was a night light plugged in or a small lamp on in a corner of the room. I wasn't looking around the room, but instead I sat up and looked directly at the door to the room. While noticing the room was red, I was staring at the door, noticing the door was not only open but something was standing right inside the door. At first I thought I was dreaming and did the whole rub my eyes violently to fix my vision and to see if I was awake thing. I really didn't know. What I did realize after removing my hands from my eyes is that something for sure was standing inside the doorway. Didn't move, and I was having a difficult time making out what I was looking at. Until it moved. At this moment is when I realized that the thing in the doorway was hunching over with the middle of its upper back rubbing against the top of the door frame. It was absolutely pitch black with no defining features or anything. Blackness. I could only make out the outline of the thing. It resembled a person with dreadlocks and what appeared to be a trench coat, possibly wings. The red light in the room was coming from two glowing red eyes. Again, two glowing eyes and a pitch black figure that was so tall the mid-upper back was rubbing against the top of the door frame. I sat there again, rubbing my eyes, taking a double and triple take. Trying my hardest to get my eyes to adjust so I could make out what was 6 feet from my feet. It then moved again, but this time into the room about a foot or two. Hunched over, looking directly at me. Didn't say a word and didn't make a sound. At that moment, while I kept my body facing it and while keeping my eyes on it, I moved my right hand around behind me, trying to find a marble or something I could throw in the direction of the door. My thinking was that it was my imagination, and by throwing something, it would make it go poof and disappear. Unfortunately, I could not find anything and decided to break my stare and slowly pull myself towards my friend's bed. At this moment, while I was trying to get closer to my friend's bed, the thing moved into the hallway and made its way down the hall to the living room. Understand the end of the hallway near my friend's bedroom had a wall-sized mirror, which allowed me to see down the hall without going into the hallway. As it made its way down the hall, the red glow went with it. At this time, I thought, this is probably my time to make a move, and woke up my friend because whatever the thing was, it was coming back up the hallway towards our room. I managed to get next to the bed while keeping an eye on the door, pulled myself up to his mattress, onto his mattress, and then finally sat almost on top of him. I was terrified. My thinking at the time was, I will wake up my friend and get him to scream for his dad. I reached out and started shaking my friend. Quietly saying out loud, "Wake up, wake up." It felt like hours had gone by until he finally woke up, looked at me, and said, "What are you doing?" Looked at me and saw that I was pointing at the door. The glow was back, and the thing was now further into the room and staring right at us. He sat up, looked at the door, and instantly pushed himself up into the corner of the bed and wall, and I literally saw the hair on his neck stand up, and he started stuttering, "What is that? What is that?" At this moment I knew for a fact what I was looking at was real. I told him to yell for his dad. "Please yell for your dad." He couldn't get the words out. He was stuttering and completely freaked out. While we sat there on the bed watching this thing in the door, the thing kept moving in and out of the door. Sometimes further into the room. Just staring at us with the red eyes and glow lighting up the room and pitch dark body, dreads, and trench coat. Suddenly from behind me my friend yells, "Dad!" Dad. If I wasn't scared already, that sent me through the roof. No joke, within seconds we heard his dad's bedroom door open, and he was standing in the doorway flicking on the light. Within seconds. Poof, it was gone. His dad was literally standing in the same spot this thing was standing. Nowhere to be found. His dad sat there staring at us, trying to figure out what our problem was. We were both huddled together in the corner of his bed, white as ghosts. My friend tells his dad there was something in our room and possibly in the house. We didn't tell him what we saw, but just something was in the room and possibly the house. He looked at us like we were crazy, but considering both of us saw the same thing and freaked out, he calmed down and ended up doing a complete sweep of the house from top to bottom to the garage. Nothing. He came back in after 15 minutes or so and told us there is no sign of a break-in or intruder. Try and go back to sleep. He turned on the hall light, left our door open, and went back to bed. We both did not sleep the rest of the night and sat on the bed with our backs against the wall watching the door. We could not sleep. We know what we saw, and it was not a figment of our imagination. The next morning his parents came in and woke us up. We had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion. His mom was pretty upset at us. She claims we went down the hallway and moved all the picture frames and moved the dining room table chairs. Things were moved around throughout the upper floor. She was convinced we were messing around throughout the night and being stupid. She demanded we go straighten everything up. We argued that it wasn't us, but there was no way to prove it. Whatever that thing was, it was brushing up against the photos on the walls and knocking chairs over in the dining room. We didn't say much to each other, and I finally went home later that morning. His parents called my parents and asked that I go home early. It was a long night. On the way home my parents could tell something wasn't right. I opened up about everything that had happened. I remember sitting in the back seat of the car exhausted, scared, and confused. I told them everything. They didn't say much. Hear me out. A few weeks go by, and I find out they talked to my great uncle, who is a pastor. He was convinced that a curtain was pulled open to reveal the supernatural realm and was showing me in particular what was in the house. He knew my friend's parents and claimed due to their arguing and oppressive relationships, it most likely was an oppressive spirit, and I happened to have the curtains pulled to reveal what was oppressing the household. Not much was said after that. I've told my wife, my kids, and a few friends, but I've mostly stayed quiet about it. Yet, I'm almost 50 and still want to know what happened, what I saw, and what it meant. There has only been one thing that I have seen that almost represents what I saw, and that's from the documentary The Nightmare. There is a particular story/scene where there is a pitch black figure with red eyes standing next to the guy's bed. I don't get scared easily with horror or scary movies, but when this scene came on, I almost threw up. It was like I was back in that room. I've never turned off a movie before, but I could not finish it. So, to this day it's still eating at me. I've often thought about finding this boy I was friends with and straight up asking him, "Do you remember?" and see what his response will be. If he remembers at all or if I'm just crazy. This is my experience. Since then I have had several experiences. Nothing as real as this but close. My wife says I can see right through people and see what's behind them. I finally did it. I wrote my story. Now, I hope there is someone out there that has some kind of answer or maybe a similar experience. Anyone? Hell yeah. Spent the night with a friend in the haunted dorm at my old college. Heard footsteps in the hall, looked out the door, nothing there. I've seen ghostly figures in the woods behind my childhood house. Had something tug my pant leg while at my desk in my childhood home. The white bedroom in my parents' house is always cold, and one time sleeping over, I took all the decorative pillows and put them on the chair. I woke up in the morning to find the decorative pillows I had placed on the chair to the left of the bed tossed all over the room. Don't even get me started on the days I worked overnight at a warehouse in an old mill building. The freight elevator. Backstory time. So we had 2 floors of packaging, but overnight we only ran the first floor, since there's no shipping at night. We had a freight elevator that ran during the day, but the night crew didn't have access. So you need a key card to run the elevator. I physically heard the elevator running at like 3 a.m. We've heard footsteps and what sounded like carts being wheeled in the back hall. Again, we need a day shift supervisor's key card to access the rear loading dock hall. We've heard rolling carts and footsteps upstairs as well, wooden floors, so it's super loud, when we 100% knew no one was up there. Many women died in that mill back in the day. I've seen several demons. The first one followed me home from a ghost hunt and hid in my closet. I could feel it. I was burning sage every night before bed, but my husband came in my room one night and told me to put it out because it stank. So that night, the demon came out of my closet, which was directly beside my bed. It had no face, but it was wearing a hooded robe, like when you picture the Grim Reaper. It scared me, so I closed my eyes, and I could still see it. It leaned over me in bed and put its hands around my throat, but instead of choking, I was being electrocuted, and all I could see in my mind's eye was lightning. It telepathically told me to renounce God. I was never a churchgoer and didn't really read the Bible or anything like that, but I believed in God. While experiencing a psychic awakening, I read several books on psychic phenomena, and one of them advised praying to God to send Archangel Michael for protection from evil. Before I could finish the prayer, the entire room was filled with blinding golden white light, and the demon vanished almost instantly. A feeling of peace and love was experienced. Another time, I was living in an old crappy hotel that had been turned into apartments, just one room with a small kitchenette and bathroom. I was sitting in the dark to see if I could observe anything, as I used to be a paranormal investigator and remain obsessed with that field. Well, the room was pitch black. However, there were demons, and I knew they were demons because they were blacker than black. So dark black. Anyway, there were several of them running back and forth through the apartments, and when they would go through, they would block the light on my microwave. I told them to get out or I would make them leave. Stupid because many of them came to me. One figure stood in front of me, resembling the Grim Reaper again, however, its face was unclear. It was as tall as the ceiling. Big looking. The other several demons were running around the room in a circle around me. I saw a large white orb about the size of a basketball up near the ceiling behind it, and it left trails behind it as it was moving. I instinctively knew it was an angel. Then, a blue-white light shined down through my ceiling, and I knew it was God. So, I laid back in my recliner and said, "Do what you are going to do, because I have God." And I shut my eyes, and then it was all over. About 30 years ago when I was in college, I went camping for a few days in some fields just outside town with 3 friends. On the last night with twilight setting in but not completely dark, we all saw this vague black shape slowly appear about 10 meters away. At first I thought it was my eyes, but then others saw it. It seemed to get gradually denser. This is going to sound weird, but it was like a dark black shadow mass with shimmers of silvery dots and lines very faintly visible all over it. Imagine the classic graphic illustration of a computer network superimposed faintly on a black blanket that's just hanging in the air. That's the closest analogy I can find for it, and one I probably put on it retrospectively, as those types of illustrations were maybe less common at the time. From memory it was maybe 5 feet high, 2 or 3 feet wide, and kind of like an upright fat sausage shape except less clearly defined than that might suggest. Shortly after we had all been alerted to it and were looking at it, this thing suddenly moved from one side of the campsite to the other in a swift, wavy motion. It came within 3 or 4 feet of the nearest person and caused them to leap up. Then when it got close to bushes on the other side of us, it seemed to just evaporate. It was so bizarre we had no idea what we had just seen. I remember we were kind of stressed by the experience, which sounds odd, but it was so bizarre it actually really disturbed us. We saw the night out and never saw it again. After a while I think we convinced ourselves we imagined it. Like it wasn't a curious woo thing, it actually felt kind of horrible, like, what the F, are we going crazy? I still feel weird even thinking about it all these years later, like this weird feeling we saw something we weren't supposed to understand or know about. Which itself sounds crazy and was maybe just me projecting an intelligence that wasn't there. Maybe it was a collective hallucination or some kind of hysteria. A swarm of fireflies? I don't know. But it was creepy as hell and genuinely terrified us. To this day I have no idea what it was, but 4 sober 17-year-olds all apparently saw the same thing. Mimics in Denver and Venice, California. I am not 100% sure that what we witnessed were mimics, but it definitely felt like something else pretending to be human. I know we have had other strange encounters, but these 2 specifically stand out in my mind and have both happened within the past month. My boyfriend and I are travelers and live in our van. I am from upstate New York, and he is from Manhattan. I have been living like this for over 5 years now and have seen a lot. One of the best parts about this lifestyle is the people you get to meet from all walks of life all over the world. Needless to say, we have a lot of exposure to different people, and we aren't easily scared by strange behavior or differences. A lot of times we will camp in national forests, but there are also plenty of nights we spend in Walmart parking lots and Home Depots and anywhere we can find with overnight street parking. This situation has led us to some sketchy areas where other homeless individuals set up camps, and it is evident that hardcore drug use occurs in some of these locations. A few weeks ago, we were in Denver and visited the Rhino District off Larimer Street, where we looked at murals and street art, took pictures, and relaxed. It was almost midnight, and we ended up in an alley behind an old Catholic church when we saw the feet and blankets of someone sleeping in a doorway. As another person on the street, I empathize as much as possible and try to give respect and privacy to those who have to sleep in such public places, even though I don't live the exact same lifestyle. For example, I avoid questioning them while they are lying there because I can imagine how uncomfortable and demeaning it would be to wake up to that. As we begin to pass this person, I remind myself not to stare and prepare for the possibility that they might be asleep or awake and looking at us, so I don't get startled. This person was lying in maybe a 3-foot indent in front of an entrance to an old factory behind this Catholic church. No matter how prepared I tried to get myself and no matter how much exposure I have to other people on the street, I could not help but get a surge of adrenaline and fear when we passed by this lady. As we got closer I glanced over, and she was sitting up, slouched in the corner, looking right at us. To me, she looked like she could have been native or Hispanic. Her skin was a mix of brown and gray, and she had long, tangled black hair. But what I remember most is her eyes. Her eyes were huge and bulging, appearing painfully strained, and her lips were effortlessly pulled back to reveal her teeth. She had a blank expression on her face the whole time we walked by. I believe this is an appropriate moment to mention that after spending time on the West Coast, one becomes quite accustomed to encountering tweakers and various meth-related behaviors. You can usually always tell when someone has lost themselves to meth, and it is a special kind of crazy, but crazy all the same. You can feel when someone has lost themselves to this drug. And the decay and neglect of their bodies is very apparent. With that being said, this woman did not give off druggy vibes. She didn't look ill and frail because of drug use, and she didn't seem to be fueled by drugs. She genuinely looked sick. Like, terminally ill type sick. The most ducked up part of this is what she said to us as we walked by, though. Shane was on my left side, my little husky was clipped to me in between us, and the lady was sitting on the ground to my right, and as we passed by and I noticed she was making eye contact, I gave her a soft, gentle smile and looked down. I don't know what Shane did to her as far as facial expressions and acknowledgement go, but as we started to pass her, she said in a soft, serious voice with no inflection at all, "What is it called when you don't believe in God anymore?" Shane quickly replied, "I think that's called agnostic." And we just kept walking. As soon as we got out of earshot, I was like, "Shane, what the F, why did that scare me so much?" And he was like, "You're okay, it was just a homeless person. It's no big deal." I had a feeling she was going to scare you, though, but it is okay. And we kept walking down the alley. At this point I let Boppy, my husky, off her clip so she could walk on her own, and she just followed behind us quietly. She never barked throughout the whole ordeal or acted scared at all. Although she is losing her eyesight a bit, I have noticed that it has heightened her other senses. She can sense when something is wrong or if someone intends to harm us, prompting her to bark and go into defense mode. She went through this whole encounter with nothing. We leave the alley and are in front of these old apartment buildings that remind us of something you'd see in New York or even New Orleans. Totally projecting, almost shotgun houses, and completely out of place for gentrified Denver. We saw them as we drove by before this happened and instantly felt drawn to them because they were so out of place. There was a kid's jungle gym type thing that they could crawl on placed on top of a bush in front of the house, which was distinct AF, but we didn't mention it until later, and there was the haze of a flashing TV screen and someone screaming in one of the houses through the open door, and this was all across the street from the old, ominous Catholic church. It was just the dark alley, the lady, the creepy church, the foreign houses, the supposed presence of children, and the soft, hazy lighting from the street light above that were such a mind duck that we felt like we weren't even in Denver anymore. Or, I hate to be this guy, but like, we weren't in 2020 anymore. Later that night, when we returned to the van, Shane told me that the woman had actually terrified him and that he knew I was scared but felt he had to act like everything was okay for my sake so I wouldn't lose my composure. He said it was just as unnatural as I felt and that he doesn't think we saw a person. When he said that, I flipped out because that is exactly what I thought, too. It was unsettling that we both felt the same thing at the same time and didn't realize it until later. I'm a skeptic, but this experience I had as a funeral home employee has me very close to reconsidering. Long story short, I have worked in the funeral business for almost 10 years. I'm an atheist, a skeptic, and in general deny the existence of the supernatural. However, there have been several instances of odd things that I have experienced in my time at one particular funeral home. In addition to feeling uneasy, sensing that someone is watching, experiencing hair standing up on the back of my neck, and hearing random footsteps upstairs when I'm alone in the building, there is one particular instance that I simply can't explain or dismiss as natural. One day, all of my coworkers and I were chatting in the crematory office downstairs. All of us. Our doors were locked because we weren't open at this time. We also have a door beeper that beeps/alarms if someone opens any door to the building. While we were all sitting downstairs talking, we heard what sounded like someone moving around at the top of the stairs that lead up to the funeral director's office, and we heard a very distinct knocking, like the sound of someone knocking on a door to announce that they want to come in said door. We all heard the knocking sound coming from the door at the top of the stairs. It did not resemble something falling, water pipes, or floor creaking. It sounded like intentional knocking made by a person. The funeral directors ran upstairs thinking we had a customer and that we must have mistakenly left the door unlocked. My manager was like, why didn't the door beeper work? Must need to be reset or something, so my coworker goes to check on that to see why it isn't beeping to tell us when a customer is here. At the same time, the funeral director comes back down and says no one is there, the door is still locked, and my other coworker comes back to say the door beeper is working just fine. Also, another saw there were no cars in the parking lot besides our own. We all just kind of sat there dumbfounded, realizing that we all definitely witnessed distinct knocking at the funeral office door at the top of the stairs. This event was significant to me due to the fact that there were multiple witnesses, and we all assumed it was a customer knocking, and the fact that no one was actually there, despite the knocking sounding so intentional and sounding exactly like it was at the funeral office door at the top of the stairs, the exact place a customer would knock if they were looking for us. To this day I have no explanation. On a side note, many other strange things happened at this funeral home, such as door slamming, footsteps, faint talking in the distance when no one else was there, and the feeling like someone was standing right behind you, which multiple people have independently experienced without talking to the other person about said things. These experiences are the closest things to convincing me that the supernatural, or at least some sort of unexplainable phenomena involving the dead, is possibly real. My only concern is, if ghosts are indeed real, why do they primarily engage in knocking on doors? In chronological order, when I was 3 and 4, I started having extremely vivid dreams of a past life. They appeared to be in what I think was the Midwest, maybe Illinois territory. I was a 19-year-old female living in a very primitive log cabin, and I was heavily pregnant. My partner, I can't remember either of our names, went hunting and never came back. I got sick, probably from the water in the creek, and the baby inside me died, and then I died. As the dreams continued, I remembered lots of details that no 3 or 4-year-old in 1956 and 57 could ever have knowledge of. This was pre-TV in my household. The creaking noise, the rope bed made when I moved, the one rough-hewn plank table in the center of the room with a hollowed-out bowl holding my last piece of stale bread and nothing else, then, antique gun hanging on the wall by the door, which I found out much later was a flintlock, the door hinges made of leather, a large fireplace big enough to walk into with a fire that had gone out because I was too weak to get out of bed, the smell of cold ashes, the door had been left ajar, and a horse with a rope bridle kept sticking its head into the cabin. I went in and out of consciousness for several days, watching the light change and the dust drift in the sunlight until I just didn't open my eyes again. The dreams were in full color. I remember vividly the green of the grass outside and the quilt on my bed, but the room itself was very dark inside, and they frightened me until it got to where I was afraid to go to sleep. At some point, I finally told my mother about the dreams, and she gave me one of those looks that made me realize I wasn't supposed to mention them. I doubt if my 4-year-old self could have described it very well. They finally went away by the time I entered kindergarten, but the memory of them has stayed with me all these years, along with the question mark of what could have caused them except a prior life. As a bit of backup to this, I learned to read spontaneously at the age of 3. I clearly remember lying on the living room floor looking at what appeared to be chicken scratches in the bubbles above the Sunday cartoons. Someone went by, and I asked them what that word was, and all of a sudden the entire page made sense. I could read anything from then on, and at the age of 4 was testing at a high school reading level. Why I wasn't put in some advanced class I'll never know, except that it was the baby boomer era and they were awash with kids, and I sucked at math, always have. I consider this proof that I already knew how to read and only needed to be reminded. Fast forward until the year I was 10, 1963. The family took a car ride down to Florida and stopped at Gettysburg on the way. I'd gotten into an argument with my idiot brothers and didn't want to get out of the car to see some stupid battlefield. My father made me get out and just walk around, and I went one way, and they went another. I crossed a parking lot and some grass, and there was a line of very old trees. I was looking at them and realized there were bullet hole scars in them, hundreds of them. I went closer and touched one of the trees, and instantaneously, the day went from high noon and a bright, sunlit blue sky day to gray, deep fog and smoky. I heard people running in the fog, equipment rattling, gunshots, booms, and shouting. I smelled gunpowder, which I knew from fireworks. It lasted long enough for me to blink repeatedly, hoping it would eventually go away. Probably 45 seconds to a minute, a very long time considering. Years later I realized it stopped when I took my hand off the tree. I was badly shaken, returned to the car, and waited until the others came back. I never told anyone for years. It was only recently I found a word for it, bilocation, but having it happen along with a 100-year relocation back in time is certainly interesting. Fast forward again, I was working at a local hospital night shift, coming home around midnight, down a 4-lane highway. I was in the left lane and needed to get over to the right to take a turn coming up. There were no other cars on the road, and as I was thinking about moving over, a male voice in my head said very clearly, "Don't move over yet." The other voice in my head, my own, kind of went. When at that moment, a police car came screaming past me without sirens or lights, going easily double my speed. I never would have seen him, he was behind a rise and wouldn't have shown up in my rearview mirror, and if I had moved over when I was thinking about it, he would have gone right through me. Years later, my son was about 2 and my daughter a newborn. He was playing outside on his new tricycle, and she was asleep but restless in the playpen. I thought about picking her up and going outside on the stoop to watch my son, and the same male voice told me, "Don't pick her up," and this time repeated the warning, clear, concise, demanding. In my usual at that time chronic lack of sleep, I just obeyed with a kind of okay then. As I went outside, I somehow tripped on my own feet, fell forward down 3 steps, and only broke my fall because my hands were free. If I had had the baby, I would have landed on her, and her head would have hit the concrete. I've had several other less intense instances of knowing stuff, like knowing that the phone ringing was bad news, or just feelings that couldn't be pinpointed. Some vague, some definitive. It's one of the reasons I'm now learning about remote viewing. My first experiences with it were unnerving, to say the least, but the final one, and the biggest in an evidential sense, was when my father died. He had had a stroke and was in a coma that grew heavier over the ensuing 10 days. I was cleaning up after dinner in my house, with no one else in the room, and I suddenly sensed my father in the room, followed immediately by getting bonked in my right temple by a literal force that had a real impact, followed then by him, his spirit or soul or personality, whatever you want to call it, going through my skull and bouncing up against the other side, saying, "This is fun." Not words I had ever heard from my father before, but damn if it wasn't him. Full force personality and quite happy to be out of the shell and coma. I got a call a few minutes later telling me that Dad had just died, but here I was, in my kitchen, with him in my head. He stayed with me for several weeks after that, as a sort of double personality taking up space in my head. He went with me to his memorial service and joked about "I've always wanted to do this, like Tom Sawyer." And chided my sister-in-law, who he never liked much, for wearing a real fur coat and me for eating too many cookies at the reception afterwards, not the first time. So, after several months of trying to figure this extraordinary experience out, going through the whole litany, yet again, of am I crazy? Was I hallucinating? Was it wishful thinking? No, and no, at least I don't think so. I was left with the only conclusion possible, that he had left me one hell of a going away present. We survived physical death, and it's pretty cool, too. Nothing like having one of life's eternal questions answered for you in no uncertain terms. I keep having paranormal experiences, and I don't know what it is. A week or so ago, things began, and I'm hoping someone can help me identify what it is. On Christmas Day I was lying on my bed with one of my cats while my boyfriend was at work. Out of nowhere I get a terrible feeling, and the room looks darker. My cat wakes up frantically and starts looking at the empty space next to me and at my sleeve. This will be mentioned later. He starts tapping the air and sleeve and flinching like something is hitting him. He's genuinely scared and runs away. For the remainder of the night, my 3 cats refused to sit on the bed and kept staring at the empty space on my bed from the hallway. I texted my BF that I had a terrible feeling and told him what happened. When he came home, he told me when he was closing at his job, he was the last person in the store, he saw a tall shadow with bright red eyes staring at him from behind the counter. He said he wasn't scared, but maybe that's the awful feeling I had. After a few days my cats finally started getting on the bed, and we thought it was over when today my BF told me he saw something again. We both got sick with the flu, and I was sleeping with my back facing him. He said he was awakened by a strange feeling, and when he opened his eyes, he saw a pale hand choking him that was attached to my sleeve, the same sleeve I had worn while with my cat. He tried moving, and he felt another hand push his head down. He described it as a young girl with a similar skin complexion as mine but different features. He said it was coming from my back, and I was wearing my shirt. He asked for its name but doesn't remember it. He then said, "God is with me," and closed his eyes, and when he opened them, the thing was gone. We are unsure what this phenomenon is, as we have lived here for about 3 years and have not experienced it, except for a few sleep paralysis episodes my boyfriend has had. I'm not sure if it's someone doing this to us, or maybe when I was wearing that shirt and hugged people on Christmas Day, something got attached to it. It might be important that both my cat and boyfriend saw something relating to the shirt. I work from home, and I haven't seen or sensed anything aside from the negative feeling I had on Christmas. I'm not sure if it's important to mention that when I had that bad feeling, I kept seeing my boyfriend and hearing his name. We want to know why it exists so we can get rid of it, but we're not afraid of it. My experience at the old Alton/Goatman's Bridge. I have been considering sharing this story for a while because discussing it seems to stir up old feelings, but I believe it's important to share my experience for you all to hear. My friend, her cousin, and I went to the old Alton Bridge a total of 3 times. While en route to the bridge, you go through a pretty remote part of Denton with nothing but trees on both sides and the road ahead of you. We saw a lot of roadkill before arriving, but we didn't think much of it because of the area. It may be a coincidence, but I will have a fondness for 333, and 666. With that said, we saw 3 carcasses on the way there. Once you arrive in the gravel parking lot, you have to pass over what I believe was a small white vehicle barrier to access the trail to the bridge. Over the barrier we noticed a steep drop in temperature the moment we passed into the woods. As you continue down the trail, there's a bench and table to your left under the canopy of trees, and right after that you have the old Alton Bridge. It was around the time we got to the bridge that I felt a strange disconnect with myself. My thoughts didn't feel like my own, and I felt something drawing me deeper into the woods, past the bridge. We proceeded deeper in and once again noticed another drop in temperature. This time it was almost chilly. It was quite a jarring difference considering how hot and humid it was before entering the woods. Around this time I began to feel strangely comfortable in the otherwise creepy woods. My thoughts felt more and more disconnected from myself and became more chaotic and cloudy. I had an urge to be destructive and use drugs. Prior to this I had about 4 to 5 months sober. Later that night I relapsed and continued using throughout our next 2 visits. Although I wasn't present during the second visit, I can recount the experiences of my friend and her cousins. After arriving, they noticed a bit of commotion in the woods and saw 3 people walking through it past the bridge. They heard a low growl in the bushes and saw a pair of glowing red eyes as they got closer to the bridge. Then on the way out, going back to the car, they noticed what they believed to be pig blood covering the windshield. They were pretty spooked but just wrote it off, as they had seen that group of 3 earlier and they were likely the culprits. Now, the third and final visit is when this all comes to a head. This time all 3 of us go. We once again notice the strange drop in temperature, and I'm back in that weird headspace. We decided this time to bring an Ouija board and ask the name of the spirit. Now I firmly believe this name holds a lot of power, so I won't say it or even type it, but I'll give y'all a hint. It's the first name of the founder of Apple. We asked a few other questions that I can't recall due to the brain fog, but I do remember when we got answers, they didn't make any sense. It would spell MN. MN is in a constant loop making a rainbow motion, completely disregarding our questions. We later discovered that this is a bad sign, indicating that the spirit you are communicating with is attempting to escape the board or open a portal. Thereafter, we proceeded back to the bench and table by the entrance to regroup. My friend discovers she has back burns on the way there. We pull out our flashlights to observe and notice 3 distinct scratches on her back. We then notice another set of 3 developing on her arms, upper back, and neck before our eyes. We couldn't rule out the possibility that the scratches were caused by any of us or a branch, since we had a clear trail. After a while we make it to the bench and have a seat, then notice the distinct smell of rotten eggs or sulfur. My friend begins to act differently at this point as well. She's constantly spacing out and acting nothing like herself. Before we arrived, she wanted to say a protection prayer that she found on Google to keep us safe. However, at this point, she was cursing God and refusing to acknowledge her previous beliefs. She wanted to go back into the woods and stay the night, then challenge the spirit to show itself. Her cousin and I were pretty spooked at this point and realized it would be best to leave. After a bit of an argument, she agrees to leave with us, not saying a word the entire walk back to the car. The smell of rotten eggs persists as we enter the car, but we still write it off, probably because we don't want to admit what's going on. On the way to her cousin's house, she still won't say a word as she drives. She then begins to speed, almost hitting 100 miles per hour, which was way out of character for her, as she's otherwise a safe driver, especially when driving my car. After telling her multiple times to slow down, she snaps out of it briefly to acknowledge us and, with a bit of an argument, slows back down. We tried talking about the experience we all just had, and she would only add stuff like maybe I'll invite it in my head. God isn't real, and I want to go back tomorrow and stay the whole night. At that moment, I realized without a doubt that something was controlling her. We arrived at her cousin's house to drop him off, and we still noticed the smell of rotten eggs following us inside. We attempt to investigate the smell by checking the fridge for hard-boiled eggs, hoping it is just a coincidence, but we find nothing. My friend is still steadfast about her newly acquired beliefs and now begins cursing the Bible without us even bringing it up. She and I leave her cousin's house at this point to return back to my house. However, I don't have any intention of dragging whatever is affecting her back to where I lay my head. I quickly shuffle with my phone while driving in circles about 10 minutes from our destination to find a prayer or anything that can rid her of whatever had come over her. I find that using "in the name of Jesus Christ, you will leave" in different variations is supposed to work, but typically only a priest is successful. We didn't have any priests available at 3 in the morning, so I'd have to do it. I repeatedly shouted the name Jesus Christ, yelling with all my strength to drown out her snarky remarks that were rebuking God. Eventually, she let out a roaring, drawn-out burp that smelled like rotten eggs, but it was 10 times more potent than the odor we had been smelling before. So I rolled all the windows down immediately to clear this putrid stench while crinkling my nose, and then she burst out laughing at me. She was back, like nothing changed, like the last 3 to 4 hours didn't even happen. In fact, for her they didn't, because she didn't remember any of it. We made it back to my house, and for the most part the worst of it was over. The next day, we both sat down and agreed to start reading the Bible following our experience. However, as soon as we began, that strange cloudy headspace returned, though not as strongly as before. We both could acknowledge what happened now and decided to reach out to an exorcist located not even 5 minutes from my house. A couple of weeks pass before we make it there to further discuss our findings at the Old Alton Bridge. In the meantime, we continue our day-to-day lives. I am purchasing my customary pack of cigarettes from the store when I observe the price of the pack. $6.66. That's strange because just 2 days earlier, the price of Marlboro Blacks was $5.70. I saved the receipt to show to my friend. At another point we were talking about what happened, and I looked at my odometer and noticed it landed right at 174,666. That could obviously be written off as just a coincidence, but the timing was really damning. We make it to the exorcist and speak to him about the bridge. He tells us he's familiar with what we experienced since he's been there multiple times with groups and had similar results, albeit not as dramatic as ours. He tells us the demon by name and says he's something like a general in Satan's army. He mentioned there was far more than one demon in those woods, and the one we encountered was ancient. He dismissed the fact that I cast out whatever was affecting my friend that night, and maybe he's right, maybe we got lucky, but I still feel I played a significant role in it. From there things went back to normal for a couple of weeks. My friend returned to work until one day she had an extremely bad panic attack and had to come by. She informed me that she continued to feel its impact on her, and it unsettled her. We take a drive while I attempt to soothe her. As we descend a side street in my neighborhood, a vehicle reverses out of a driveway, nearly colliding with us in the process. We honk to let him know he almost hit us until we notice the car is just sitting in front of us and no one's in it. That's weird. We go to the house, knock on the door, and let the guy know what happened, and he's just as confused as we are. He tells us that the car is a manual transmission, and he might have forgotten to release the parking brake before trying to move it. I suppose such things can happen, but this situation is starting to feel like a series of coincidences. That just about sums it up, though. There were a few additional minor instances when I noticed the numbers on billboards while discussing them with friends, but for the most part, I've been free of such occurrences. The last time I spoke to my friend, she had become a born-again Christian and was living a good life. A couple of details I missed. On our third trip to the bridge with all three of us, we noticed new graffiti on the bridge saying the trio, and we did bring cameras to document it, but unfortunately I lost all the pictures we got of the dozens of orbs in the woods and the scratches on my friend's body. I'll come back if I remember anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed it. My boyfriend and I went to Gettysburg for an overnight trip. After dinner and a night on the town, we went back to the hotel and went to bed. He immediately passed out, drunk. I had had a piña colada or two but was definitely not drunk. Something woke me up. I looked at the clock, and it was just a few minutes after I'd gotten to sleep. My BF was still passed out. I sat up and looked across the hotel room and saw a ballroom with soldiers and finely dressed women dancing. Everyone was having a fine time. Then a soldier came over to me and asked me if I was scared. I told him no. He said good, that I shouldn't be. About that time, he disappeared, and my body started shaking. Somehow I knew that he had inhabited my body, but I could still sense him. I asked him why he was doing this to me. He just told me not to be scared, and I wasn't, I was almost peaceful. There was still dancing going on, and I watched it while my body was convulsing. Then, everything just disappeared. I thought to myself, what a cool experience that was. I laid back down and went to sleep. True story. No, I wasn't drunk. No, I hadn't done any drugs. I don't even watch horror movies. The next morning, I told my BF what had happened. He believed me and told me that we were in the Gettysburg Hotel, original, but redone after the fire. When we were checking out, I asked the clerk if the hotel used to have a ballroom. I was told that there used to be one down the hall from the room we had stayed in. So very cool. I will never forget that and believe that it did, 100%, happen. I think I saw a demon in real life. This is something that is really difficult to talk about for many reasons. First of all, it makes me sound a little crazy, and I'm sure it's not something many people can really say. Second of all, I'm really self-conscious talking about this because I would rather not sound like I'm poor shaming or anything. Let me get that out of the way first. I grew up poor, but my family, I'm 19 male, has only recently had money. So I want to be abundantly clear that I have nothing whatsoever against poor people. This comes into play, and I wanted to make sure this account comes across seriously instead of sounding like I was traumatized by a poor-looking weird person. So to set the stage, I was on a trip in California, and we were going along the Pacific Highway. We had left the Redwood Forest and were en route to San Francisco, and when we stopped, we were in the middle of absolute nowhere. We stopped because we saw that there was a restaurant, Jack in the Box, right off of the highway, and we were all hungry and it was getting dark. It was the weirdest place for a fast food place, to be honest. It was in the absolute middle of nowhere. There was a gas station, a Jack in the Box, and then a tiny, shitty little motel, and then nothing but trees and country roads for miles. We pulled into the parking lot, got out, and went inside, and we were basically the only ones in there aside from 2 employees. There was a small family, but they looked like they were getting ready to leave. And sure enough, within 2 or 3 minutes, they left, leaving us, myself, my mother, and my sister, as the lone patrons. We ordered and sat, and as we were sitting, we heard the door open. I looked, and what met my eyes still haunts me. There was a woman standing there, with long, unkempt hair. She was probably about 5 feet 4 inches and as skinny as can be. She was white, but her skin didn't look right. It looked like it didn't fit her, and it looked like it was either muddy or rotten in some places. She was wearing a dirty gray tank top and sweatpants that didn't fit her, as if she had taken them from someone else. They were hanging so low that they exposed part of her privates. I quickly turned my head away and shot a glare at my mom and sister that was meant to tell them not to look and that something didn't feel right here. I have gotten vibes since I was a young child. They've been right, probably about 95% of the time, so much so that when I have a vibe about someone or something, my family almost always treats it as fact. And when that woman, though I'm not sure if that's exactly what I should call her, was behind me, I felt pain in my body as fear consumed me. And not the kind of fear that I would describe as fight or flight. I would say more the kind of fear I imagine a sinner would have on their deathbed. I honestly felt as though any moment, the pits of hell could open up and she would grab me and throw me in. I felt nothing but a sinister, pure evil presence emanating from where she was. I feel completely certain that she was either a demon or a person possessed by a demon, and I'm as sure of it now as I was when this all first happened. I couldn't help but look back every now and then. Her behavior was erratic. She would leave the store for a couple of minutes, then come back, then leave again, wash, rinse, and repeat. She never even ordered anything. She would just stand there like she wasn't sure what she was doing. And when she walked, her legs moved in a way that seemed almost as if she didn't know how to use them. Every time she left, my soul would sigh with relief, and every time she came back, it was as if the dread multiplied. I thank God every day that I didn't meet her eyes, though occasionally I wonder what I would have seen if I had. Hell, perhaps? The face of the devil? I guess I'll never know, and I don't think I want to. Anyways, she eventually left for good, not long before my family left ourselves. I was shell-shocked. It was without a doubt one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life. I checked under the car when we left, just in case she was there, clinging on. I honestly felt like that was a true possibility. My mom wanted to talk about it right away because she was as freaked out as I was. My sister also wanted to talk because she didn't understand why my mom and I were being so frantic and anxious. I told them both to shut up, rather sharply, because I was allowing my pent-up fear and anxiety to boil over a little bit, just so that I didn't explode from the pressure building inside. I can't explain well why I reacted so angrily. I just had this innate feeling inside of me that speaking of something evil while still so close would somehow summon it or allow it to follow us. Once we were about 30 minutes down the road, I felt a lot safer about talking about everything. I told my mom and sister all that I had been feeling and started shaking and crying as I told them everything. My sister was completely oblivious while we had been there, but my mom was freaked out by her too. She mostly just was scared because she could tell how terrified I was but didn't entirely know why. I wish it ended there. But unfortunately, the most terrifying part, for me at least, hadn't happened yet. We arrived at our hotel in San Francisco at about 11:30 p.m. I made my sister follow mom and me into the hotel because I was terrified of being in the car without mom and didn't want to leave her alone because I felt like she would be stolen away if I took my eyes off of her. Keep in mind, I was a 16-year-old male at the time, and I had held my own against various different things that had come my way, so it was abnormal for me to be so shaken up about something. We checked into the hotel, as creepy as the hotel felt at night after something so abnormal and frightening happening, without any issue, and settled in for the night. I fell asleep rather quickly, because I felt like the life had literally been drained from my body, and I just could not stay awake a second longer. I awoke at 4 a.m., there was complete silence in the room. This was odd, given that my mother snores louder than a blender every night. So I was instantly on high alert. I felt like I needed to get up and look around, but I couldn't. My limbs felt glued in place. I could see movement in the far reaches of the shadows in the dark hotel room, out of the corner of my eyes. Then she walked out of the shadows towards me. She had red eyes and horns protruding from her skull, but she was the same woman I had seen in Jack in the Box. She walked over to the foot of my bed and looked at me. I didn't look back at her once she had seen me, for fear of meeting her eyes. But I could still feel her piercing red eyes boring into my soul. I closed my eyes and prayed to God for mercy. And when I opened my eyes, she was gone, and I regained all movement, as if a spell had been lifted. I dove under the covers and piled pillows on top of my head and quivered and sobbed before passing out. In the morning, I told no one of what had happened. I kept it entirely to myself until the next part of our vacation in Wyoming. I felt like I was right that being too close and speaking of her could summon her. I just suppose I was wrong when I assumed we were a safe distance from her. Please believe me when I say this is an entirely true tale. None of it is embellished, nothing is made up. I know it sounds far-fetched, but I have scars in my heart and soul from this experience that will be difficult to repair. I get nauseous any time I think about Jack in the Box, and not just because their food is awful. And I never wish to drive along that coastal highway again. It's the same highway that confronted me directly with the presence of evil. I feel like I need to cleanse my soul after telling this story.